Taxes. Would life be worth living if we had to pay such taxes as our fathers had to do? Here are a few. The hearth or chimney tax of 2s. For every fireplace or stove in houses rated above 20s. Per annum was imposed in the 15th year of Charles Roman II's reign, but repealed in the first year of William and Mary, 1689. The owners of Edgbaston Hall paid for 22 chimneys before it was destroyed in 1668. In 1642, there was a duty of £4 a pair on silk stockings. A window tax was enacted in 1695 to pay for the recoinage of the gold coin, and was not entirely removed till July 24, 1851. From a return made to Parliament by the Tax Office in 1781, it appeared that the occupiers of 2,291 houses paid the window tax in Birmingham. There was collected for house and window tax in 1823 from the inhabitants of this town the sum of £27,459.12, 1-3/4d, though in the following year it was £9,000 less. Bachelors and widowers were rated by 6 and 7 William Roman III, c. 6, to enable the king to carry on the war against France with rigor. Births, marriages, and deaths were also made liable to duties by the same act. The salt duties were first levied in 1702, doubled in 1732, and raised again in 1782, ceasing to be gathered in 1825. The price of salt at one period of the long Peninsular War rose to £30 per ton, being retailed in Birmingham at 4l. per lb. Carriages were taxed in 1747, armorial bearings in 1798, receipts for money and promissory notes were first taxed in 1782. Hair powder tax of 21s per annum was first levied in 1795. In 1827 there was a 1s, 3d, duty on almanacs. The 3s, advertisement duty was reduced to 1s, 6d. In 1833 and abolished August 4, 1853. The paper duty, first put on in 1694, was repealed in 1861. That on bricks taken off in 1850, on soap in 1853, on sugar in May, 1874, and on horses the same year. Hats, gloves, and linen shirts were taxed in 1785. Patent medicines, compound waters, and codfish in 1783. In fact, every article of food, drink, and clothing required by man from the moment of his birth until his burial, the very shroud, the land he trod on, the house he lived in, the materials for building, have all been taxed. For coming into the world, for living in it, and for going out of it, have Englishmen had to pay, even though they grumbled. Nowadays the country's taxes are few in number, and per head are but small in amount, yet the grumbling and the growling is as heavy as of old. Can it arise from the pressure of our local rates, where our fathers paid 20s? To the government we do not pay 5s, but where the old people gave 5s. In rates we have to part with 25s. Telegraphs. The cable for the first Atlantic telegraph was made here. Its length was 2,300 nautical miles, and it required £690,000 of copper in addition to the iron wire forming the strand, of which latter there was about 16,000 miles length. The first time the Queen's speech was transmitted to this town by the electric telegraph was on Tuesday, November 30, 1847, the time occupied being an hour and a half. The charge for sending a message of 20 words from here to London in 1848 was 6s, 6d. The submarine telegraph co. laid their wires through Birmingham in June and July, 1853. Temperance. There appears to have been a sort of a kind of a temperance movement here in 1788, for the magistrates, at their sitting August 21, strongly protested against the increase of dram drinking, but they went on granting licenses, though. Father Matthew's first visit was September 10, 1843, J.B. Goes, September 21, 1853, Mr. Booth's in May, 1882. The first local society for inculcating principles of temperance dates from September 1, 1830. UK Alliance organized a branch here in February, 1855. The first Templars' Lodge was opened September 8, 1868. The Royal Crusaders banded together in the summer of 1881, and the blue ribbons were introduced in May, 1882. This novelty in dress ornamentation was adopted, so they said, by over 40,000 inhabitants, but at the end of 12 months the count was reduced to 8,000 including Sunday school children, popular parsons, maidens looking for husbands, old maids who had lost their chances, and the guid people, who, having lost their own tastes, would fain keep others from their cakes and ale. Temple Roe, Perch Meeting, in 1715 ordered the purchase of land for a passageway out of Bull Street to St. Philip's Church. It was not until 1842, when part of the Royal Hotel stables were taken down, that it was made its present width. In 1837, the churchyard had some pleasant walks along the sides, bounded by a low wooden fence and skirted with trees. Temple Street takes its name from the old summer arbor, wittily called the Temple, which once stood in a garden where now Temple Row joins the street. An advertisement in Gazette of December 5, 1743, announced a house for sale in Temple Street, having a garden 12 yards wide by 50 yards long, adjoining the fields and with a prospect of 4 miles distance. Theatrical jottings what accommodation, if any, was provided here for their Majesty's servants. The play actors, in the times of Queen Anne and her successor, George I, is not known. But as Hutton tells us that in 1730, the amusements of the stage rose in elegance so far that threepenny performances were given, in a stable in Castle Street. We may be sure the position held by members of the profession was not very high in the estimation of our townsfolk previous to that period. Indeed, it would almost seem as if the acting of plays was quite an innovation at the time named, and one that met with approval, for shortly after we read of there being theatres in Smallbrook Street, in New Street, and a new theatre in Moore Street. The first named closed in 1749 or 1750. The second is supposed to have been on the site of the present Theatre Royal, but it could not have been a building of much importance, as we find no note of it after 1744. The third, built in 1739, was taken possession of by the disciples of Wesley, and on March 21, 1764, was opened as a chapel. Previous to the last event, however, another theatre had been erected, in 1752, in King Street, leading out of New Street, near to the Free School, which, being enlarged in 1774, is described by Hutton as having few equals. In this year also, 1774, the Theatre Royal was erected, at a cost of nearly £5,700, though the latter half of its title was not assumed until August 1807, on the occasion of the royal assent being given to the house being licensed. A bill had been introduced into the House of Commons for this purpose on the 26th of March, 1777, during the debate on which Burke called Birmingham the great toy-shop of Europe, but it was thrown out on the second reading. The King Street Theatre, like its predecessor in Moore Street after a time of struggle, was turned into a place of worship in 1786, a fate which, at a later date, also befell another place of public entertainment, the Circus in Bradford Street, and the theatrical history of the town, for a long term of years centered round the Theatre Royal, though now and then spasmodic attempts were made to localize amusements more or less of a similar nature. One of these, and the earliest, was peculiarly unfortunate. Early in 1778, a wooden pavilion, known as the concert booth, was erected in the Moseley Road, dramatic performances being given between the first and last parts of a vocal and instrumental concert, but some mischievous or malicious incendiary set fire to the building, which was burnt to the ground. 13 of the same year. 4 years later, and nearly at the same date, 17, the theatre in New Street met with a like fate, the only portion of it left being the stone front, added in 1780, which is still the same, fortunately coming almost as safely through the next conflagration. The proprietors cleared away the ruins and erected a more commodious structure, which, under the management of Mr. William Macready, was opened June 22, 1795. In the meantime, the King Street Theatre having been chapelized, the town appears to have been without any recognized place for dramatic entertainments other than those provided in the large rooms of the hotels, or the occasional use of a granary transmogrified for the nonce into a thespian arena. On the night of the 6th of January, 1820, after the performance of Pizarro, the Theatre Royal was again burnt out, but possibly from having their property insured up to £7,000, the proprietors were not so long in having it rebuilt, the doors of the new house being opened on following Aug. 14. This is practically the same building as the present, which has scats for about 500, the gallery holding 1,000. Many of the first artists of the profession have trod the boards of the old theater since the last named date, and Birmingham has cause to be proud of more than one of her children, who, starting thence, have found name and fame elsewhere. The scope of the present work will not allow of anything more than a few brief notes, and those entirely of local bearing, but a history of the Birmingham stage would not be uninteresting reading. A wooden building in Moore Street, formerly a circus, was licensed March 19, 1861, closed in 1863, and cleared off the ground in 1865. Theatrical performances were licensed in Bingley Hall in 1854. The Prince of Wales Theatre, previously Broad Street Music Hall, was opened in 1862. It was reconstructed in 1876 and has accommodation for an audience of 3,200. The Holt Theatre was opened May 12, 1879, the license to the lower grounds being granted November 29, 1878. The last new theatre, the Grand in Corporation Street, must rank as one of the handsomest edifices in the town. It faces what was once the Old Square and has a frontage of 120 ft. The height to the cornice of the roof being 52 ft. The whole being capped with a dome supporting a winged figure of Oraro, which, drawn in a car by prancing horses, is 15 ft. high. The interior is laid out in the most improved modern style, ornately decorated throughout, and provides accommodation for over 3,000 persons. The cost is put at £30,000, of which £17,000 went to the builders alone, and the theatre is the property of Mr. A. Melville. The opening day was Nov. 14th, 1883. The interlude of De Rightened Wake, with the representation of a bull baiting, was part of the performance announced at the King Street Theatre, May 31, 1783. Mrs. Sarah Siddons, whose debut in London the previous season had been anything but successful, came to Birmingham for the summer season of 1776. Henderson, one of her colleagues here, notwithstanding the Drury Lane veto, declared that she was an actress who never had an equal nor would ever have a superior, an opinion quickly verified. One of Kean's benefits was a total failure. In the last scene of the play, A New Way to Pay Old Debts, wherein allusion is made to the marriage of a lady, "Take her," said Kean, and the Birmingham audience into the bargain. Garrick was visiting Lord Lytton at Hagley on one occasion when news was brought that a company of players were going to perform at Birmingham. His lordship suggested that Garrick should write an address to the audience for the players. "Suppose, then," said he, "I begin thus. Ye sons of iron, copper, brass, and steel, who have not heads to think, nor hearts to feel." "Oh," cried his lordship, "if you begin like that, they will hiss the players off the stage and pull the house down." "My lord," replied Garrick, "what is the use of an address if it does not come home to the business and bosoms of the audience?" A Birmingham Garrick was the name given to an actor named Henderson, 1782, whose friends did not think him quite so great a tragedian as he fancied himself. Kemble made his last appearance on the Birmingham stage July 9, 1788. Robinson Crusoe, or Harlequin Friday, was the pantomime in 1790. Madame Catalini first appeared at Royal in 1807. Incledon, the famous tenor, sang here first time in same year. William Charles Macready made his debut on the stage of the Royal as Romeo, June 7, 1810. He took his farewell benefit Aug. 13, 1871. Alfred Bunn had the theatre in 1823, during which year there appeared here Mr. and Mrs. C. Kemble, W. C. Macready, Joey Grimaldi, Miss Ellen Tree, afterwards Mrs. Charles Keene, W. Farah, Braham, Elliston Doughton, Rignold, and Power. Barry Sullivan was born here in 1824. In 1824, the whole town was up in arms taking part in the Battle of the Preachers and the Players, which was commenced by the Reverend J. Ogil James delivering a series of sermons bitterly inveighing against the theatre, as a place of amusement, and pouring forth the most awful denunciations against the frequenters thereof. Alfred Bunn, the manager, was not slow to retort. He put the hypocrite on the boards, Shooter, the clever comedian and mimic, personating Mr. James in the part of Mawworm so cleverly that the piece had an immense run. The battle ended in a victory for both sides, chapel and theatre alike being crammed. If it pleased the godly, it was a godsend for Bunn whose exchequer it filled to repletion. Signer Costa was at the festival in 1829, and he afterwards appeared on the stage at the Royal. Paganini first fiddled at the Royal, January 22, 1832. Sheridan Knowles, Macready, Paganini, Matthews, and Miss Ellen Tree were among the stars at the Royal in 1833. Mercer H. Simpson took the management of the Royal in 1838. His farewell benefit was on December 16, 1864, and he died March 2, 1877, aged 76. Sims Reeves' first visit to this town was in May, 1843. His last appearance at the festivals was in 1873, at the Royal in May, 1875, and at the Town Hall, March 25, 1884. Jenny Lind first sang Heerog. 29, 1847, she sang for the Queen's Hospital at Town Hall, Deck. 28, 1848, her last concerts were Jan. 22-23, 1862. Madel Rachel first played Heerog. 19, 1847. Charles Dickens and his amateur friends gave their special performances in aid of the Shakespeare House Fund. At the Royal, June 6 and 27, 1848, the receipts amounting to £589. Variety was not wanting at our New Street Theatre in 1852. Among the artistes advertised to appear were a strong man who had 5 cwt. Of stone broken by a sledge-hammer on his chest nightly, performing Dogs and Horses, Madame Grissy, Signor Mario, Haymarket Company, Benjamin Webster, and Madame Celeste, etc., etc. Miss Mencken, the female Maespa, appeared at Prince of Wales, May 15, 1865, and at the Royal in Nov. 1807. Miss Nielsen's first appearance here was in Nov. 1868, in an adaptation by Mr. C. Williams, a local dramatist, of Miss Braddon's Captain of the Vulture. Mr. Irving first appeared as Hamlet in this town at Prince of Wales, Deck, 1877. Sarah Bernhardt was at Prince of Wales, July 4-6, 1881. Keel Bailu last appeared here at Prince of Wales, Sept. 17, 1881. Mrs. Langtry was at Prince of Wales, May 29, 1882. Edwin Booth's first appearance here was at the Royal, as Richelieu Deck, 11, 1882. Bobby Atkins, whose real name was Edward, was the most popular comedian of the Royal, with which he had been connected for more than 25 years. He died in 1882 in his 64th year. His bosom friend, John Barton, made his exit from the world's stage April 16, 1875. Sir George Rignold's mother is stated by Mr. Thomas Swinburne, himself a native, to have been a leading actress of the Theatre Royal and very popular, as indeed she would necessarily be, her role of parts including Hamlet and Virginius. The father was, says Mr. S., an admirable terpsichorean artiste, and George inherits the talents of both parents, with a dash of music besides, for, like William in Black-Eyed Susan, he plays on the fiddle like on Angel. 2 or 3 of our places of amusement have been turned into chapels permanently, and therefore it was hardly a novelty to hold gospel services in the Prince of Wales's Theatre, October 3, 1875, but it was to their credit that the gods behaved themselves. Time when it is exactly 12 at noon here in Birmingham, it is 7 min, 33 secs, past at Greenwich, 12 min, 50 secs, past at Dover and 16 min, 54 secs, past at Paris, while it wants 112 mins, to the hour at Manchester 912 min, at Glasgow 17 min, 50 secs, at Dublin and 26-1/2 mins, at Cork. At Calcutta the corresponding time would be 6, 1-1/2 p.m., Canton 7.4 p.m., Japan 9.15 p.m., Mexico 5.34 a.m., New Orleans 8.5 a.m., New York 7.11 a.m., New Zealand 11.45 p.m., Nova Scotia 7.55 a.m., San Francisco 4.5 a.m., St. Petersburg 2.1 p.m., Sydney 10.12 p.m., and at Washington just 7 o'clock in the morning. Ties 150 years ago, if not considerably later, the rector of St. Martin's was paid tithes in cash based on the value of the crops, and c. 1 acre of good wheat being tithed at sevens. 6d. An acre of good barley at fours. 412d. An acre of flax and hemp if pulled at fives, an acre of good oats, peas, or potatoes and all kinds of garden stuff at threes. 9d. For meadowland 4d, an acre and 2d. For leaso or leaseland, 3d. Being claimed for cow and her calf. 112d. For each lamb, and c. In course of time these payments were changed into a fixed tithe rent, but before matters were comfortably settled, the rector found it necessary to give notice, April 1814, that he should enforce the ancient custom of being paid in kind. The gun trade was brisk at that time, but whether the reverend gentleman took his tenths of the guns, what he did with them, or how the parties came to terms is not recorded. The tithes formerly due in kind to the vicar of Edgbaston were commuted by Act passed June 8, 1821, into art annual corn rent, payable by the occupiers or all kinds in the parish. Tower originally, all guns made here for government, had to be put together in London, but when the French Revolution broke out, it was seen that a quicker mode of procedure was necessary, and an establishment in Baggot Street was erected in 1798, where all guns for government were viewed and stamped with the Tower mark. Hence the name. Town criers were first appointed in 1526. Jacob Wilson entered into office May 4, 1853, and was pensioned off with 15s. A week in August, 1879, after a family tenure of the office, according to Jacob, of about 350 years. Surely it was a crying shame to stop the children of that family from crying in the future. The last of the criers did not last long after deposition from office, Jacob's last words being uttered in 1881. Town improvement some 50 and odd years ago Dobbs, a local comedian, used to sing. Brummagem has altered so, there's scarce a place in it I know. Round the town you now must go to find old Brummagem. Had he lived till these days, he might well have sung so. For improvements are being carried out so rapidly now that in another generation it is likely old Birmingham will have been improved off the face of the earth altogether. Prior to the days of steam, our forefathers went about their work more leisurely, for it was not until 1765 that the act was obtained for the enlightening of the streets. And 4 years later, when the first act was passed, April 21, 1769, for street improvements. The street commissioners appointed by this act, and who held their first meeting May 22, 1769, for many years did little more than regulate the traffic of the streets, keep them cleanish, and look after the watchmen. In course of time, the operations of the said commissioners were extended a little, and it is to them that we owe the existence of the central open space, so long known as the Bull Ring, for they gave £1,730 in 1801 for the removal of 9 tenements there, and then blocking the way. Money must have been of more value then than now, for if such a purchase was necessary at the present date, 1 or 2 more figures would require being added to the amount. This town improvement was completed in 1806, when the commissioners purchased the remaining houses and shops round St. Martin's, but property owners had evidently learned something during the 5 years. For whereas the commissioners at first estimated the further cost at £10,957, they reluctantly had to provide no less than £22,266, the additional sum required being swallowed up by incidental expenses. The poet already quoted had apparently been absent during these alterations, for he wailingly bemoaned, "Poor old Speisel Street half gone, the poor old church stands all alone, and poor old I can only groan, that I can't find Brummagem." Though an improvement act for Dudeston and Nechells was obtained in 1829, the town improvements for the next 40 years consisted principally of road making, street paving, market arranging, and c. the opening up ideas not getting well rooted in the minds of our governors, until some time after the town council began to rule the roast. That a great deal of work was being done, however, is shown by reference to the borough accounts for 1840, in which year £17,366 was expended in lighting, watching, and otherwise improving the thoroughfares, in addition to £13,794 actually spent on the highways. 1852 saw the removal of the turnpikes, at a cost of over £3,200. In the same year, £5,800 was expended in widening the entrance to Temple Row from Bull Street, and £1,800 for rounding off the corner of Steelhouse Lane and Snow Hill. In October 1853, it was decided to obtain for £33,000 the 11,540 square yards of land at the corner of Ann Street and Congreve Street, where the municipal buildings, art gallery, and new gas office now stand. Almost every year since has seen the purchase of properties more or less required for substantial improvements, though some of them may not even yet have been utilized. A few fancy prices might be named which have had to be paid for odd bits of property here and there, but about the dearest of all was £53 per yard, which the council paid in 1864 for the land required to round off the corner of New Street and Worcester Street, a further £1,300 going, in 1873, to extinguish certain leasehold rights. This is by no means the highest figure given for land in the center of the town, as Mr. John Feeney, in 1882, paid at the rate of £66 per yard for the site at corner of Cannon Street and New Street, the portion retained for his own use costing him even more than that, as he generously allowed the corporation to take 31 2-yards for £1,000. The introduction of the railways and consequent obliteration of scores of old streets, courts, alleys, and passages has been of vast service towards the general improvement of the town, as well in the matter of health and sanitation, as leading to the construction of many new buildings and the formation of adequate approaches to the several railway stations, the erection of such establishments as the Queen's Hotel, the Great Western Hotel. And see nor have private property owners and speculators been at all backward, as evidenced by our magnificent modern banking establishments, the huge piles of commercial buildings in Colmore Row, New Street, and Corporation Street, the handsome shops in New Street, High Street, and Bull Street, with many other edifices that our grandfathers never dreamed of, such as the Midland, the Grand, and the Stork hotels, the palatial clubhouses, the colonnade and arcades, new theaters, inns of court, and see. Many of these improvements have resulted from the falling in of long leases on the Colmore, the Grammar School, and other estates, while others have been the outcome of a far-seeing policy on the part of such moneyed men as the late Sir Josiah Mason, Isaac Horton, and others of somewhat similar caliber. Going away from the immediate center of the town, architectural improvements will be noted on all hands, Snow Hill, for one place, being evidently in the regenerative throes of a new birth, with its Gothic arcade opposite the railway station and the new circus at the foot of the hill, where for so many long years there has been nothing but a wreck and a ruin. In close neighborhood, Constitution Hill, Hampton Street, and at the junction of Summer Lane, a number of handsome houses and shops have lately been erected by Mr. Cornelius Ada in the early Gothic style, from designs by Mr. J.S. Davis, the architect of the Snow Hill Arcade, the whole unquestionably forming a very great advance on many former street improvements. The formation in 1880 of John Bright Street as an extension of the Bristol Road, cost £30,000, has led to the erection of many fine buildings in that direction. The opening out of Meeting House Yard and the alterations in Floodgate Street in 1879 at a cost of £13,500 has done much for that neighborhood. The widening of Worcester Street and the formation of Station Street, and c. thanks to the enlargement of the central station and the remodeling of all the thoroughfares in the vicinity of Navitian Street and Worcester Wharf, also arising therefrom, are important schemes now in progress in the same direction. And in fact, there is hardly any district within the borough boundaries in which improvements of more or less consequence are not being made, or have been planned, the gloomy old burial grounds having been turned into pleasant gardens at a cost of over £10,000, and even the dirty watercourses known as the River Rhea and Hockley Brook have had £12,000 worth of cleaning out bestowed upon them. It is not too much to say that millions have been spent in improving Birmingham during the past 50 years, not reckoning the cost of the last and greatest improvement of all, the making of Corporation Street, and the consequent alterations on our local maps resulting therefrom. The adoption of the Artisans' Dwelling Act, under the provisions of which the Birmingham Improvement Scheme has been carried out, was approved by the town council on the 16th of October, 1875. Then, on the 15th of March, 1876, followed the local government board inquiry, and on the 17th of June, 1876, the provisional order of the board approving the scheme was issued. The confirming act received the royal assent on the 15th of August, 1876. On the 6th of September, 1880, a modifying order was obtained, with respect to the inclusion of certain properties and the exclusion of others. The operations under the scheme began in August 1878, when the houses in New Street were pulled down. In April 1879, by the removal of the Union Hotel, the street was continued into Cherry Street. And further extensions have been made in the following order: Cherry Street to Bull Street, August 1881. The Priory to John Street, June 1881. Bull Street to the Priory, January 1882. John Street to Aston Street, February 1882. Little Cannon Street was formed in August 1881, and Cowper Street in January 1881. The first lease of land in the area of the schemata, the Women's Hospital, was agreed upon in January 1876, and the first lease in Corporation Street to Mr. J.W. Dannelly was arranged in May 1878. In July 1879, a lease was agreed upon for the new county court. The arbitrations and the purchase of properties under the scheme were begun in June 1879, and in June 1880, Sir Henry Hunt, the arbitrator nominated by the local government board, made his first award, amounting to £270,405, the remainder of the properties having been bought by agreement. The loans borrowed on account of the scheme amount to £1,600,000, the yearly charge on the rates being over £20,000 per annum. But as the largest proportion of the property is let upon 75-year leases, this charge will, in time, not only be reduced yearly by the increase of ground rents, as the main and branch streets are filled up, but ultimately be altogether extinguished, the town coming in for a magnificent income derived from its own property. The length of Corporation Street from New Street to Lancaster Street is 851 yards, and if ultimately completed, as at first intended, from Lancaster Street to Aston Road, the total length will be 1,484 yards or 5/6 of a mile. The total area of land purchased for the carrying out of the scheme is put at 215,317 square ids, about 44 A, 1 R, 38 P, of which quantity 39,280 square yards has been laid out in new streets, or the widening of old ones. Of the branch or connecting streets intended, there is one, from Corporation Street to the corner of High Street and Bull Street, opposite Dale End, that cannot be made for several years, some valuable leases not expiring until 1890 and 1893. But, judging by the present rate of building, Corporation Street itself will be completed long before then. More than a score of the unhealthiest streets and lanes in the town have been cleared away, and from a sanitary point of view, the improvement in health and saving of life in the district by the letting in of light and air has been of the most satisfactory character. But though the scheme was originated under the Artisans' Dwelling Act, intended to provide good and healthy residences in lieu of the pestiferous slums and back courts, it cannot in one sense be considered much of a success. The number of artisans' dwellings required was 1,335, about 550 of which were removed altogether, the rest being improved and relet, or converted into shops, warehouses, and see a piece of land between Newtown Row and Summer Lane, containing an area of 14,250 square yards, was purchased for the purpose of leasing for the erection of artisans' dwellings, and a 50 ft. wide street was laid out and nicely planted with trees. But, owing either to the badness of trade or the overbuilding of small houses in other parts previously, less than a sixth of the site has been taken, and but a score of houses built, a most wonderful contrast to the rapid filling of Corporation Street with its many magnificent edifices, present and prospective, that promise to make it one of the finest streets in the provinces. There cannot, however, be such necessity for the erection of small houses as was imagined when the Act was adopted here, for according to a return lately obtained, and not reckoning the thousands of little domiciles on the outskirts, there are in the borough 445 houses usually let at weekly rentals up to 2s. 6d. per week, 24,692, the rentals of which are between 2s, 6d, and 3s. 6d and 36,832 others between 3s, 6d, and 7s. Per week, a total of 65,969 working men's houses, but of which 5,273, taking 1 week with another, are always void. Toyshop of Europe. It was during the debate in the House of Commons, March 26, 1777, on the first reading of a bill to license the theatre in Birmingham, that Mr. Burke, who spoke in its favor, described this town as the great toyshop of Europe. At that time, and for long afterwards, hundreds of articles of utility manufactured here were roughly classed as light steel toys and heavy steel toys, though we should hardly now be likely to consider tinder boxes, steelyards, pokers, fire shovels, and tongs as playthings. Trade notes of the past foreigners were not allowed to carry on any retail trade here before 1663. The Brums never liked them. An official document of 1695 states that the trade of the town was chiefly in steel, iron, and other ponderous commodities. In 1702, it was enacted that if brass, copper, latten, bell-metal, gun-metal, or shruff-metal be carried beyond C, clean or mixed, double the value thereof to be forfeited, tin and lead only excepted. An act was passed March 20, 1716, prohibiting trade with Sweden, much to the inconvenience of our local manufacturers, who imported Swedish iron for conversion into steel in large quantities. The Act 1 Geo. I. C. 27, 1720, forbidding the exportation of artisans to foreign countries was not repealed till 1825 5 Geo. Roman 4, C. 97. In April 1729, our manufacturers petitioned that the colonists in America should be encouraged to send pig iron over here. 10 years previously, they bitterly opposed the idea. 10 years later, they repented, for their American cousins filled our warehouses with their manufactured goods. In 1752, it was stated that above 20,000 hands were employed here in useful manufactures. In 1785, a reward of 50 guineas was offered here for the conviction of any person enticing workmen to go to foreign countries. The penalty for such enticing being a fine of £100 and 3 months' imprisonment. Trade societies and trades unions are of modern growth, unless we count the old-style combinations of the masters to prevent their workmen emigrating, or the still more ancient guilds and fraternities existing in medieval times. There are in all 177 different trades unions in the country, coming under the notice of the Registrar General, and most of them have branches in this town and neighborhood. The majority have sick and benefit funds connected with them, and so far should be classed among friendly, benevolent, or philanthropic societies. But some few are plainly and simply trade associations to keep up prices, to prevent interference with their presumed rights, to repress attacks by the avoidance of superabundant labor, and to generally protect members when wrongfully treated, cheated, or choused. Prior to 1834, when some 20,000 persons assembled on Newhall Hill, March 31 to protest against the conviction of Dorset laborers for trades unionism, few of these societies were locally in existence. But the advent of free trade seems to have shown all classes of workers the necessity of protecting their individual interests by means of a system of protection very similar, though on smaller scale, to that abolished by Sir Robert Peel and his friends. That there was a necessity for such trade societies was clearly shown by the harsh manner in which they were denounced by John Bright at a town hall banquet, held April 28, 1875, that gentleman evidently demurring to the anomaly of working men being protectionists of any kind. Foremost among the local unions is the National Society of Amalgamated Brassworkers, originated April 18, 1872, with over 5,000 members now on its books. Having in its first 8 years subscribed and paid to members out of employ no less than 29,000, the pounds builders' laborers combined in 1861. And pay out yearly over £200 for sick and funeral benefits. The National Association of Master Builders was organized here on deck. 1877. The Butchers' Trade and Benevolent Association, organized in 1877, helps its members in case of need, keeps a sharp lookout when new cattle markets and C are proposed, and provides a jury to help the magistrates in any doubtful case of scragmag, wherein horse flesh, donkey meat, and other niceties have been tendered to the public as human food. The gentlemen, belonging to the fraternity of accountants, met on April 20, 1882, to form a local institute of chartered accountants, and their clients know the result by the extra charges of the chartered ones. The Clerks' Provident Association provides a register for good clerks out of employ for the use of employers who may want them. And of course, there can be no good clerks out of employ, except those who belong to the association. It was commenced in 1883 from a philanthropic feeling, but must rank among trade societies as much as many others. The Coal Merchants and Consumers Association, for regulating the traffic charges and otherwise protecting the trade, especially the sellers, was organized in 1869. The Dairymen and Milksellers Protection Society came into existence April 2, 1884. And is intended to protect the dealers against the encroachments of the Birmingham Dairy Company, and all customers from the cows with wooden udders or iron teats. The dentists in May 1883 held the first meeting of the Midland Odontological Society. But it is not expected that the people at large will be entirely protected from toothache earlier than the first centenary of the society. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers was formed early in 1847. The Amalgamated Society of Engineers dates half a century back, its 430 branches having collectively about 50,000 members, with a reserve fund of £178,000. Though the expenditure in 1883 was £124,000, out of an income of £134,000. Locally, there are 3 branches, with 765 members, having balances in hand of £2,075. The expenditure in 1883 being £680 to men out of work, £585 to sick members, £390 to the superannuated, £171 for funerals, and £70 in benevolent gifts. The Birmingham and Midland Counties Grocers' Protection and Benevolent Association, started in 1871, has a long name and covers a considerable area. It was designed to make provision for the wives and families of unfortunate members of the trade when in distress, to defend actions brought against them under the Adulteration Acts, and most especially to protect themselves from the encroachments of the merchants, importers, and manufacturers, who do not always deliver £112. To the CWT, or keep to sample. The licensed victuallers first clubbed together for protection in 1824, and the retail brewers and dealers in wine followed suit in 1845, both societies spending considerable sums yearly in relief for decayed members of the trade. The licensed victuallers having also a residential asylum for a number of their aged members or their widows in Bristol Road. The Journeymen Printers opened a branch of the Provincial Typographical Association Oct. 12, 1861, though there was a society here previously. The first local union we find record of was among the Knights of the Thimble, the tailors striking for an increase in wages in 1833. A branch of the Amalgamated Society of Tailors has lately been organized. In 1866, a General Trades Council was formed, which utilizes by combined action the powers of the whole in aid of any single society which may stand in need of help. Trades and manufactures there are no published returns of any kind that have ever been issued by which more than a guess can be made at the real value of the trade of Birmingham, which varies considerably at times. At the present moment, March 1885, trade is in a very depressed state, and it would hardly be correct to give the exact figures were it even possible to obtain them, and any statistics that may appear in the following lines must be taken as showing an average based upon several years. Speaking at a council meeting, February 19, 1878, Mr. Alderman Joseph Chamberlain said the best way to ascertain the trade of the town was to take the local bank returns and the railway traffic in and out, so far as the same could be ascertained. The deposits in all the banks that published returns were, at the end of 1877, £10,142,936, as against £10,564,255 in the previous year, falling off of £421,312, or 4%. With regard to bills of exchange held by the banks, the amount was £3,311,744, against £3,605,067 in the previous year, falling off of £293,323, or 8%. The amount of the advances, however, was £6,041,075, as against £5,570,920 in the previous year, an increase of £470,155, or 8.12%. With regard to the trade of the town, by the courtesy of the managers of the respective companies, he was able to give the numbers of tons of goods, of coals and other minerals, the loads of cattle, and the number of passengers. The tons of goods were 973,611, as against 950,042 in 1876, an increase of 23,569 tons, or about 2.12%. The tons of coal were 566,535, against 575,904, falling off of 9,372 tons, or 1.12%. The other minerals were 119,583 tons, against 100,187, an increase of 19,369, or 19%. The loads of cattle were 22,462 last year, against 19,157 in the previous year, an increase of 3,305 loads, 17%. These were the returns of the in and out traffic. The number of passengers was 5,787,616 in 1877, against 5,606,330, an increase of 181,285, or about 3.14%. So far as the traffic went, as they had been led to expect from the Board of Trade returns, there had been an increase of business, but a decrease of profits. And as to the decrease of profits, he had some figures which showed that the profits of trade for the parish of Birmingham for the year ending April 1, 1877, were £3,989,000, and of the preceding year £4,292,000, falling off of £323,000, or a trifle over 8%. These figures of Mr. Chamberlain's may be accepted as representing the present state, the increase in numbers and consequent addition to the traffic, in being balanced by the lesser quantity of goods sent out, though it is questionable whether the profits of trade now reach £3 million per year. Notwithstanding the adverse times, the failures have rather decreased than otherwise, there being 13 bankruptcies and 313 arrangements by composition in 1883 against 14 and 324, respectively, in 1882. To get at the number of tradesmen, and see, is almost as difficult as to find out the value of their trade. But a comparison at dates 50 years apart will be interesting as showing the increase that has taken place in that period. A directory of 1824 gave a list of 141 different trades and the names of 4,980 tradesmen. A similar work published in 1874 made 745 trades, with 33,462 tradesmen. To furnish a list of all the branches of trade now carried on and the numbers engaged therein would fill many pages, but a summary will be found under population. And for fuller particulars, the reader must go to the census tables for 1881, which may be seen at the reference library. The variety of articles made in this town is simply incalculable, for the old saying that anything from a needle to a ship's anchor could be obtained in Edgbaston Street is really not far from the truth. Our manufacturers including the makers of almost everything that human beings require, be it artificial eyes and limbs, ammunition, or armor. Beads, buttons, bedsteads or buckles, cocoa, candlesticks, corkscrews or coffee pots, door bolts, dessert forks, dog collars, or dish covers. Edge tools, earrings, engines or eyeglasses, fire irons, fiddle bows, frying pans or fish hooks, gold chains, gas fittings, glass toys or gun barrels, hairpins, harness, handcuffs or hurdles, ironwork, isinglass, inkstands or inculators, jewelry, javelins, Jews' harps or baby jumpers, kettles, kitchen ranges, knife boards or knuckle dusters, lifting jacks, leg irons, latches, or lanterns, magnets, mangles, metals, or matches, nails, needles, nickel, or nutcrackers. Organ pipes, optics, oil cans, or ornaments, pins, pens, pickle forks, pistols, or boarding pikes, quart cups, quoits, quadrats, or curiosities, rings, rasps, rifles, or railway cars, spades, spectacles, saddlery or sealing wax thermometers, thimbles, toothpicks, or treacle taps, umbrellas or upholstery, ventilators, vices, varnish or vinegar, watches, wheelbarrows, weighing machines, or water closets. A Londoner who took stock of our manufactories a little while back received information that led him to say, a week's work in Birmingham comprises, among its various results, the fabrication of 14 million pens, 6,000 bedsteads, 7,000 guns, 300 million cut nails, 100 million buttons, 1,000 saddles, 5,000 copper or bronze coins, 20,000 pairs of spectacles, 6 tons of papier-mâché wares. Over 20,000 pounds worth of gold and silver jewelry, nearly an equal value of gilt and cheap ornaments, 12,000 pounds worth of electroplated wares, 4,000 miles of iron and steel wire, 10 tons of pins, 5 tons of hairpins and hooks and eyes, 130,000 gross of wood screws, 500 tons of nuts and screw bolts and spikes, 50 tons of wrought iron hinges, 350 miles length of wax for vestas, 40 tons of refined metal, 40 tons of German silver, 1,000 dozen of fenders, 3,500 bellows, 800 tons of brass and copper wares. Several of these items are rather over the mark, but the aggregate only shows about 1/2 a real week's work, as turned out when trade is good. Agricultural implements such as draining tools, digging and manure forks, hay knives, scythes, shovels, spades, and as well as mowing machines, garden and farm rollers, plows, harrows, and are the specialities of some half-dozen firms, the oldest established being Messrs. Mapplebeck and Lowe, opposite Smithfield Market. American Traders. It has been stated that there is not a bona fide American trader residing amongst us, though at one time they were almost as numerous as the Germans now are. Be that as it may, the following statistics, giving the declared value of exports from Birmingham to America during the 10 years ending Sept. 30, 1882, taken from a report made by the American Consul General in London, show that a vast trade is still being carried on with our friends on the other side of the Atlantic. Year ending September 30, 1873, $7,463,185. 1874, 778,957. 1875, $4,791,231. 1876, $3,135,234. 1877 to $842,871. 1878, $2,309,513. 1879, $2,435,271. 1880, $4,920,433. 1881, $4,376,611. 1882, $5,178,118. Total, $43,231,429. Ammunition to manufacture ammunition for guns and pistols, so long made here by the scores of thousands, would seem but the natural sequence. But though percussion caps were yearly sent from here in millions of grosses, the manufacture of the complete cartridge is a business of later growth. For the invention of gunpowder, the world had to thank a monk, and it is no less curious that we owe percussion caps to the scientific genius of another churchman, the first patent for their construction being taken out by the Reverend Mr. Forsyth in 1807. They were very little thought of for long after Waterloo, and not introduced into the service until 1839, several foreign armies being supplied with them before the War Office allowed them to be used by Tommy Atkins with his Brown Bess. A machine for making percussion caps was patented by John Abraham in 1864. The manufacture of such articles at all times involves several dangerous processes, and Birmingham has had to mourn the loss of many of her children through accidents arising therefrom. See explosions. The ammunition works of Messrs. Kynoch and Co. at Whitton cover over 20 acres and gives employment to several hundred persons. the contrariness of human nature being exemplified in the fact that the death-dealing articles are mainly manufactured by females, the future mothers or wives perchance of men to be laid low by the use of such things. The plant is capable of turning out 500,000 cartridges per day, as was done during the Turkish War, and it takes 50 tons of rolled brass, 100 tons of lead, and 20 tons of gunpowder weekly to keep the factory fully going. All kinds of ammunition for rifles and machine guns being made on the premises. Other extensive works are those of the Birmingham Small Arms and Metal Co. at Adderley Park Mills and the National Arms and Ammunition Co. at Small Heath and Perry Bar. Artificial eyes and limbs are necessary articles to some members of the genus Homo, but the demand, fortunately, is not of such an extensive character as to require many manufacturers. Indeed, the only firm in Birmingham that devotes itself entirely to supplying artificial limbs is that of Messrs. Best and Son, Summer Lane, whose specialities in the way of arms and legs are famed in all English and continental medical circles as wonderful examples of the peculiar mechanism requisite to successfully imitate the motions and powers of natural limbs. There are half a dozen makers of eyes, human and otherwise, the chief being Messrs. Pash and Son, Bristol Street, and Mr. Edward Hooper, Suffolk Street, who hold the almost unique position of being the sole known makers of artificial human eyes anywhere. Few people would imagine it, but it is said that there are at least 1,500 persons in Birmingham who carry glass eyes in their head. While the demand from foreign countries is something enormous, the United States taking the lead as they fain would do in everything. But there is no part of the civilized world, from Spitzbergen to Timbuktu, where Birmingham-made eyes are not to be seen, even the callous, heathen Chinny buying them in large quantities. Naturalists and taxidermists find here eyes to match those of any creature that has lived and breathed, and dolls' eyes are made by the ton. Bedsteads, metallic the making of iron and brass bedsteads, as a staple trade, dates only from the accession of Her Majesty. But unlike that august personage, they were a long time before they were appreciated as they deserved to be. For, in 1850, there were only 4 or 5 manufacturers in the town, and their output did not reach 500 a week. Now, about 1,800 hands are employed in the trade, and the annual value of the work sent out cannot be less than £200,000. Boiler making the making of iron boilers, gas holders, sugar boilers, and may be dated as a special trade from about 1831, when 30 men and boys were employed thereat, turning out about 150 tons yearly. In 1860, about 200 hands turned out 1,000 tons. In 1880, the workers were roughly estimated at 750 to 800, and the output at 4,500 tons. Booksellers in 1750, there were but 3, Eris, Warren, and Wollaston. Now the booksellers, publishers, and wholesale stationers are over 100, while small shops may be counted to treble the number. Boots and shoes are manufactured by about 40 wholesale houses, several doing a great trade, and of retailers and little men, there are a dozen gross, not counting cobblers who come with the last. American-made articles were first on sale here in March 1877. Riveted boots may be said to have originated, in 1840, through the mistake of a local factor's traveler, who booked an order for copper sprigs too extensive for his customer. Another of the firm's commercials suggested the riveting if iron lasts were used. A Leicester man, in a small way, took up the notion and made a fortune at it, the real inventor only getting good orders. Ellis's patent boot studs to save the sole, and the Euchnamida, or concave-convex fastening springs, are the latest novelties. Brass the making of goods in brass was commenced here about 1668, but the manufacture of brass itself was not carried on before 1740, when Mr. Turner built his works in Coleshill Street. The Brass and Spelter Co. was started in February 1781, with a capital of £20,000 in £100 shares. Brasshouse Passage, Broad Street, tells of the site of another smelting place, the last chimney of which was demolished on January 27, 1866. The Waterworks Co. bought the site for offices. Stamped brass came in through Richard Ford in 1769, and the process at first was confined to the manufacture of small basins and pans, but in a very few years it was adapted to the production of an infinitude of articles. Pressed brass rack pulleys for window blinds were the invention of Thomas Horne, in 1823, who applied the process of pressure to many other articles. Picture frames, nicely molded in brass, were made here in 1825 by a modeler named Morris Garvey. In 1865, it was estimated that the quantities of metal used here in the manufacture of brass were 19,000 tons of copper, 8,000 tons of old metal, 11,000 tons of zinc or spelter, 200 tons of tin, and 100 tons of lead, the total value being 2,371,658 pounds. Nearly double this quantity is now used every year. The number of hands employed in the brass trade is about 18,000. Buckles were first worn as shoe fastenings in the reign of Charles Roman II. When in fashion, they were made of all sizes and all prices, from the tiny half-inch on the hatband to the huge shoe buckle for the foot, and varying from a few pence in price to many guineas the pair. The extent of the manufactures at one time may be guessed from the fact of there being over 20,000 buckle makers out of employ in 1791-2. When vain petitions were made to the royal princes to stem the change, then taking place in the fashions. Sir Edward Thomason said his father in 1780 made 1,000 pair par day, mostly of white metal, but some few plated. By one pattern, known as the silver penny, he cleared a profit of 1,000 pounds. The introduction of shoestrings, and naturally so, was much ridiculed in our local papers, and on one occasion was made the pretext for a disgraceful riot, the pickpockets mobbing the gentlemen going to and from one of the musical festivals, the wearers of shoestrings being hustled about and robbed of their purses and watches. Buttons. The earliest record of button-making we have is dated 1689, but Mr. Baddeley, inventor of the oval chuck, who retired from business about 1739, is the earliest local manufacturer we read of as doing largely in the trade, though 60 or 70 years ago there were 4 or 5 times as many in the business as at present, blue coats and gilt buttons being in fashion. By an act passed in the 4th of William and Mary, foreign buttons made of hair were forbidden to be imported. By another act, in the 8th of Queen Anne, it was decreed that any tailor or other person convicted of making, covering, selling, using, or setting on to a garment any buttons covered with cloth, or other stuff of which garments are made, shall forfeit £5 for every dozen of such buttons, or in proportion for any lesser quantity. By an act of the 7th of George I, any wearer of such unlawful buttons is liable to the penalty of 40 shillings per dozen, and in proportion for any lesser quantity. Several cases are on record in which tradesmen have been heavily fined under these strange laws, and before they were repealed, it is related by Dr. Doran, in 1855, that one individual not only got out of paying for a suit of clothes because of the illegality of the tailor in using covered buttons, but actually sued the unfortunate snip for the informer's share of the penalties. The funniest part of the tale being that the judge who decided the case, the barrister who pleaded the statute, and the client who gained the clothes he ought to have paid for, were all of them buttoned contrary to law. These acts were originally enforced to protect the many thousands who at the time were employed in making buttons of silk, thread, and sea by hand, and not, as is generally supposed, in favor of the metal button manufacturers, though on April 4, 1791, Thomas Jem, the solicitor to the Committee for the Protection of the Button Trade, advertised a reward for any information against the wearers of the unlawful covered buttons. The gilt button days of Birmingham was a time of rare prosperity, and dire was the distress when, like the old buckles, the fashion of wearing the gilt on the blue went out. Deputations to royalty had no effect in staying the change, and thousands were thrown on the parish. It was sought to revive the old style in 1850, when a deputation of button makers solicited Prince Albert to patronize the metallic buttons for gentlemen's coats, but fashion's fiat was not to be gainsaid. John Taylor, High Sheriff of Warwickshire in 1756, is said to have sent out about £800 worth of buttons per week. Papier-mâché buttons came in with Henry Clay's patent in 1778. He also made buttons of slate. Bolton of Soho was the first to bring out steel buttons with facets, and it is said that for some of superior design he received as much as 140 guineas per gross. Horn buttons, though more correctly speaking they should have been called hoof buttons, were a great trade at one time, selling in 1,801 as low as 512d per gross. Maltese buttons, glass beads mounted in metal, were in 1812 made here in large quantities, as were also the Bath metal drilled shank button, of which 20,000 gross per week were sent out, and a fancy cut white metal button, in making which 40 to 50 firms were engaged, each employing 20 to 40 hands. But the whole trade in these specialities was lost in consequence of a few men being enticed to or imprisoned in France, and their establishing a rival manufacture. Flexible shanks were patented in 1825 by B. Sanders. Fancy silk buttons with worked figured tops were patented by W.M. Elliot in 1837. Porcelain buttons, though not made here, were designed and patented by a Birmingham man, R. Prosser, in 1841. The threefold linen button was the invention of Humphrey Jeffreys in 1841 and patented by John Aston. In 1864, so great was the demand for these articles that one firm is said to have used up 63,000 yards of cloth and 34 tons of metal in making them. Cadbury and Green's Very button is an improvement on these. Vegetable ivory, the product of a tree growing in Central America and known as the corozo palm, was brought into the button trade about 1857. The shells used in the manufacture of pearl buttons are brought from many parts of the world, the principal places being the East Indies, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the islands of the Pacific Ocean, Panama, and the coasts of Central America, Australia, New Zealand, and see the prices of shell. Very, very much. Some not being worth more than 20 pounds per ton, while as high as 160 pounds to 170 pounds has been paid for some few choice samples brought from Macassar, a seaport in India. The average import of shell is about 1,000 tons per year, and the value about 30,000 their pounds are 265 button manufacturers in Birmingham, of whom 152 make pearl buttons, 26 glass, 8 horn and bone, 14 ivory, 12 gilt metal, 3 wood, and 5 linen, the other 45 being of a mixed or general character, silver, brass, steel, wood, and papier-mâché being all more or less used. Nearly 6,000 hands are employed in the trade, of whom about 1,700 are in the pearl line, though that branch is not so prosperous as it was a few years back. Chemical manufactures about 50,000 tons of soda, soup, bleaching powder, oil of vitriol, muriatic acid, sulfuric acid, and C, are manufactured in or near Birmingham every year, more than 20,000 tons of salt, 20,000 tons of pyrites, and 60,000 tons of coal being used in the process. China, in the shape of knobs and C, was introduced into the brass founding trade by Harcourt Bros. In 1844. China bowls or wheels for casters were first used in 1849 by J.B. Geithner. Chlorine James Watt was one of the first to introduce the use of chlorine as a bleaching agent. Citric acid, Messrs. Sturge have over 60 years been manufacturing this pleasant and useful commodity at their works in Wheely's Lane. The acid is extracted from the juice of the citron, the lime, and the lemon, fruits grown in Sicily and the West Indies. The Montserrat lime juice cordial, lately brought into the market, is also made from these fruits. About 350 tons of the acid, which is used in some dyeing processes, and C, is sent out annually. Coins, tokens, and medals let other towns and cities claim preeminence for what they may. Few will deny Birmingham's right to stand high in the list of money-making places. At what date it acquired its evil renown for the manufacture of base coin, it would be hard to tell. But it must have been long prior to the Revolution of 1688, as in some verses printed in 1682, respecting the Shaftesbury medal, it is thus sneeringly alluded to. The wretch that stamped got immortal fame, 'twas coined by stealth, like groats in Birmingham. Smiles, in his Lives of Bolton and Watt, referring to the middle of the last century, says, one of the grimmest sights of those days were the skeletons of convicted coiners dangling from gibbets on Handsworth Heath. Coining was a capital offence for hundreds of years, but more poor wretches paid the penalty of their crimes in London in a single year than here in a century, wicked as the bad boys of Brummagem were. An immense trade was certainly done in the way of manufacturing tokens, but comparatively few counterfeits of the legal currency were issued. except in cases where a royal patent had been granted for the purpose, as in the instance of the historical Wood's halfpence, £100,000 worth nominal of which, it is said, were issued for circulation in Ireland. These were called in as being too bad, even for Paddy's land, and probably it was some of these that the hawker, arrested here, oct. 1733, offered to take in payment for his goods. He was released on consenting to the £7 worth he had received being cut by a brazier and sold as metal, and his advertisements, handbills, burnt. These bad halfpence weighed about 60 to the lb, 2s, 6d, worth nominal being somewhat less than 10d. In value. In the 10 years prior to 1797, it has been estimated that 700 tons of copper were manufactured here into tokens, and the issue of the celebrated Soho pence, providing the nation with a sufficiency of legitimate copper coin, did not stay the work. The number of tokens in circulation in the early part of the present century being something wonderful, as many as 4,000 different varieties having been described by collectors, including all denominations. From the Bank of England's silver dollar to a country huckster's brass farthing, more than 9/10 of these were made in Birmingham, and of course our tradesmen were not backward with their own specimens. The overseers issued the well-known workhouse penny, a copper 3-penny piece, silver shillings and sixpences, paper notes for 2s, 6d, and leather bonds for 5s. With the exception of the penny, these are all scarce now, particularly the 5s, 2s, 6d, and 6d. A specimen of the latter lately being sold at auction for 47s. In 1812, Sir Edward Thomason struck, for a reading banker, Mr. J.B. Monk, 800 gold tokens of the nominal value of 40s each, but this was just a step too far, and the government forbade their use. In the same year, he also manufactured 2 million penny tokens for our soldiers in Spain, which were not forbidden. The permitted manufacture of token money came to an end with the year 1817, an act coming into force Jan. 1, 1818, forbidding further issue from that date or the circulation of them after the end of the year, except in the case of the overseers of Birmingham, who were granted grace till Lady Day, 1820, to call in what they had issued. In 1786, Bolton struck over 100 tons of copper for the East India Co., and adding to his presses yearly, soon had plenty of orders, including copper for the American colonies, silver for Sierra Leone, and a beautiful set for the French Republic. To enumerate all the various coins, medals, and tokens issued from Soho would take too much space, but we may say that he brought the art of coining to a perfection very little surpassed even in the present day. In 1789, he made for the Privy Council a model penny, halfpenny, and farthing, but Red Tapeism delayed the order until 1797, when he began coining for the government twopennies, only for 1 year, pennies, halfpennies, and farthings, continuing to do so until 1806, by which time he had sent out not less than 4,200 tons weight. In this coinage of 1797, the penny was made of the exact weight of 1 Oz, the other coins being in proportion. In 1799, 18 pennies were struck out of the pound of metal, but the people thought they were counterfeit and would not take them until a proclamation ordering their circulation was issued December 9th. They became used to a depreciation of currency after that, and there was but very little grumbling in 1805, when Bolton was ordered to divide the pound of copper into 24 pennies. The machinery of Bolton's mint, with the collection of dies, pattern coins, tokens, and medals, were sold by auction in 1850. The collection should have numbered 119 different pieces, but there was not a complete set for sale. Mint, however, could not be called extinct as Messrs. Watt & Co., successors to Bolton and Watt, who had removed to Smethwick in 1848, struck over 300 tons of copper and bronze coin between 1860 and 1866, mostly for foreign countries. The first English copper penny, 1797, was struck in Birmingham, and so was the last. Messrs. Ralph Heaton and Son, the Mint Warstone line, receiving the contract in April, 1853. For 500 tons of copper coin, comprising pence, halfpence, farthings, half-farthings, and quarter-farthings. The present bronze coinage came into use December 1st, 1860, and Messrs. Heaton have had several contracts therefore since then. This firm has acquired a reputation quite equal to the Soho Mint. and hives supplied the coins silver, copper, and bronze for Belgium, Canada, China, Chile, Denmark, Germany, Haiti, India, Republic of Colombia, Sarawak, Sweden, Tunis, Turkey, Tuscany, Venezuela, and other principalities and states, including hundreds of tons of silver blanks for our own government and others, sending workmen and machinery to the countries where it was preferred to have the coins struck at home. Bolton, in his day, supplied the presses and machinery for the mint on Tower Hill, and they are still in use, as well as for the Danish, Spanish, and Russian authorities. Mexico, Calcutta, Bombay, and C. Messrs. Heaton and the modern Soho firm, also dealing in such articles. Foremost among modern local metallists is Mr. Joseph Moore of Pittsford Street, whose cabinet of specimens is most extensive. An effort is being made to gather for the new museum and art gallery a collection of all coins, medals, and tokens struck in Birmingham, and if it can be perfected, it will necessarily be a very valuable one. Coal, over 500,000 tons of coal, are used in Birmingham annually. Cocoa, the manufacture of cocoa, cannot be classed among the staple trades of the town, but one of the largest establishments of the kind in the kingdom, if not in the world, is that of Messrs. Cadbury, at Bourneville, where nearly 400 persons are employed. The annual consumption of cocoa in this country is estimated at £13 million, and the proportion manufactured by Messrs. Cadbury, who have houses in Paris, Sydney, Melbourne, Montreal, and may be guessed at from the fact that their works cover nearly 4 acres, and packing boxes are required at the rate of 12,000 per week. Copying presses were invented by James Watt and patented in May 1780. His partner, Bolton, had a lot ready for the market and sold 150 by the end of the year. Compressed air power 100 years ago, every little brook and streamlet was utilized for producing the power required by our local mill owners, gun barrel rollers, and then came the world's revolutionizer, steam, and no place in the universe has profited more by its introduction than this town. Gas engines are now popular, and even water engines are not unknown, while the motive power derivable from electricity is the next and greatest boon promised to us. Meanwhile, the introduction of compressed air as a means of transmitting power for long distances marks a new and important era, not only in engineering science, but in furthering the extension of hundreds of those small industries, which have made Birmingham so famous a workshop. In the Birmingham Compressed Air Power Company's Bill, passed March 12, 1884, the principle involved is the economic utility of centralizing the production of power, and many engineers are of opinion that no other means can possibly be found so convenient as the use of compressed air in transmitting motive power, or at so low a cost, the saving being quite 20%, compared with the use of steam for small engines. The Birmingham Bill provides for the supply of compressed air within the wards of St. Bartholomew, St. Martin, De Ruyterand, and Bordesley, which have been selected by the promoters as affording the most promising area. In the 3 wards named, there were rated in March of 1883 as many as 164 engines, of which the nominal horsepower varied from 12 to 10, 59 from 11 to 2015 from 21 to 30, 6 from 32 to 50, 10 from 52 to 100, and 4 from 102 to 289. Assuming that of these the engines up to 30 horsepower would alone be likely to use compressed air, the promoters count upon a demand in the 3 wards for 946 nominal and perhaps 3,000 indicated horsepower. To this must be added an allowance for the probability that the existence of so cheap and convenient a power, laid on, in the streets will attract other manufacturers to the area within which it is to be available. It is proposed, therefore, to provide machinery and plant capable of delivering 5,000 indicated horsepower in compressed air, and to acquire for the work sufficient land to permit of their dimensions being doubled when extension shall become necessary. The site which has been chosen is a piece of ground belonging to the Birmingham and Warwick Canal Company, and situated by the canal, and bounded on both sides by Sampson Road North and Henley Street. Here the promoters are putting down 4 air-compressing engines, driven by compound and condensing steam engines, and which are to be heated by 6 sets, 4 in each set of elephant boilers. From the delivery branches of the air compressors, a main 30 in diameter will be laid along Henley Street, and bifurcating, will be taken through Sampson Road North and Stratford Street at a diameter of 24 in. The mains will then divide, as to pass down Sandy Lane, Faisley Street, Floodgate Street, Bradford Street, Bromsgrove Street, and other thoroughfares, giving off smaller branches at frequent intervals, and so forming an elaborate network. The whole cost of buildings, plant, and construction is estimated at £140,500, but upon this large outlay, it is hoped to realize a net annual profit of £9,164, or 6.12% on capital. The engineers, reckoning the annual cost of producing small steam power in Birmingham at £10 per indicated horsepower, which will probably be regarded as well within the mark, propose to furnish compressed air at £8 per annum. And if they succeed in carrying out the scheme as planned, it will without doubt be one of the greatest blessings ever conferred on the smaller class of our town's manufacturers. Fenders and fire irons. The making of these finds work for 800 or 900 hands, and stove grates, a trade introduced from Sheffield about 20 years back, almost as many. Files and rasps are manufactured by 60 firms whose total product, though perhaps not equal to the Sheffield output, is far from inconsiderable. Machines for cutting files and rasps were patented by Mr. Shilton, Dartmouth Street, in 1833. Fox, Henderson & Co. in March 1853, this arm employed more than 3,000 hands, the average weekly consumption of iron being over 1,000 tons. Among the orders then in hand were the ironwork for our central railway station, and for the terminus at Paddington, in addition to gasometers, and C, for Lima, rails, wagons, and wheels for a 55-mile line in Denmark, and the removal and re-election of the Crystal Palace at Sydenham. C. Exhibitions. Noteworthy men. Footnote 1, transcriber's note. This is probably a typographical error for re-erection. Galvanized buckets and other articles are freely made, but the galvanizers can hardly be pleasant neighbors, as at the works of one firm 40 to 50 carboys of muriatic acid and several of sulfuric acid are used every day, while at another place the weekly consumption of chemicals runs to 2 tons of oil of vitriol and 7 tons of muriatic acid. German silver to imitate closely as possible the precious metals, by a mixture of baser ones, is not exactly a Birmingham invention, as proved by the occasional discovery of counterfeit coin of very ancient date, but to get the best possible alloy sufficiently malleable for general use has always been a local desideratum. Alloys of copper with tin, spelter, or zinc were used here in 1795, and the term German was applied to the best of these mixtures as a Jacobinical sneer at the pretentious appellation of silver given it by its maker. After the introduction of nickel from the mines in Saxony, the words German silver became truthfully appropriate as applied to that metal, but so habituated have the trade and the public become to brassy mixtures that German silver must always be understood as of that class only. Glass, the art of painting, and see-on glass was brought to great perfection by Francis Edgington of the Soho Works in 1784. He supplied windows for St. George's Chapel, Windsor, Salisbury, and Lichfield cathedrals, and many country churches. The east window of St. Paul's, Birmingham, and the east window of the south aisle in Aston Church are by Edgington. One of the commissions he obtained was from the celebrated William Beckford, Lord Mayor of London, for windows at Fonthill, to the value of £12,000. He was not, however, the first local artist of the kind, for a Birmingham man is said to have painted a window in Haglev Church in 1756-57 for Lord Lyttelton, though his name is not now known. William Raphael Edgington, son of Francis, appeared in the Directory of 1818 as a glass painter to the Princess Charlotte, but we can find no trace of his work. Robert Henderson started in the same line about 1820, and specimens of his work may be seen in Trinity Chapel. He died in 1848. John Hardman began in Paradise Street about 1837, afterwards removing to Great Charles Street, and thence to Newhall Hill, from which place much valuable work has been issued, as the world-known name well testifies. Engraving on glass is almost as old as the introduction of glass itself. There is a beautiful specimen in the art gallery. Glass flowers, fruit, and C, as ornamental adjuncts to brass foundry, must be accredited to W.C. Aitken, who first used them in 1846. American writers claim that the first pressed glass tumbler was made about 40 years back in that country, by a carpenter. We have good authority for stating that the first pressed tumbler was made in this country by Rice Harris, Birmingham, as far back as 1834. But some years earlier than this dishes had been pressed by Thomas Hawks & Co. of Dudley and by Bacchus and Green of Birmingham. No doubt the earliest pressing was the old square feet to goblets, ales, jellies, and C. Primitive it was, but like Watt's first engine, it was the starting point, and Birmingham is entitled to the credit of it. It is very remarkable that none of the samples of Venetian glass show any pressing, although molding was brought by them to great perfection. It would not be fair to omit the name of the first mold maker who made the tumbler mold in question. It was Mr. James Stevens, then of Camden Street, Birmingham, and it is to him, and his sons, James and William, that the world is greatly indebted for the pressing of glass. The older Stevens has been dead some years, and the sons have left the trade. Previous to this mold being made for tumblers, Mr. James Stevens made some pressed salt molds to order for an American gentleman visiting Birmingham. Some of the most beautiful works in glass fountains, candelabra, and C that the world has ever seen have been made at Messrs. Osler's, Broad Street, whose showrooms are always open to visitors. Guns the imitative, if not inventive, powers of our forefathers have been shown in so many instances that it is not surprising we have no absolute record of the first gun maker, when he lived, or where he worked, but we may be confident that firearms were not long in use before they were manufactured here. The men who made 15,000 swords for the Commonwealth were not likely to go far for the muskets with which they opposed Prince Rupert. The honor of procuring the first government contract for guns rests with Sir Richard Newdigate, one of the members for the county in William Roman III's reign, a trial order being given in 1692, followed by a contract for 2,400 in 1693 at 17 each. For the next 100 years the trade progressed until the government, in 1798, found it necessary to erect view rooms, now the Tower, Bagot Street, in Birmingham. From 1804 to 1817, the number of muskets, rifles, carbines, and pistols made here for the government amounted to 1,827,889, in addition to 3,037,644 barrels and 2,879,203 locks sent to be set up in London, and more than 1 million supplied to the East India Co. in the 10 years ending 1864, including the Crimean War. Over 4,000,000 military barrels were proved in this town, and it has been estimated that during the American Civil War our quarreling cousins were supplied with 800,000 weapons from our workshops. Gun stocks are chiefly made from beech and walnut, the latter for military and best work, the other being used principally for the African trade, wherein the prices have ranged as low as 6d per gun. Walnut wood is nearly all imported, Germany and Italy being the principal markets. During the Crimean War, one of our manufacturers set up sawmills at Turin, and it is stated that before he closed them, he had used up nearly 10,000 trees, averaging not more than 30 gun stocks from each. To give anything like a history of the expansion of, and changes in, the gun trade during the last 15 years would require a volume devoted solely to the subject. But it may not be uninteresting to enumerate the manifold branches into which the trade has been divided till late years, most of them being carried on under different roofs. The first portion, or makers, include stock makers, barrel welders, borers, grinders, filers, and breechers, rib makers, breech forgers, and stampers, lock forgers, machiners, and filers, furniture forgers, casters and filers, rod forgers, grinders, polishers, and finishers, bayonet forgers, socket and ring stampers, grinders, polishers, machiners, hardeners, and filers, band forgers, stampers, machiners, filers, and pin makers, sight stampers, machiners, jointers, and filers. Trigger boxes, oddwork makers, and see the setters up include machines, jiggers, lump filers, and break-off fitters, stockers, percussioners, screwers, strippers, barrel borers, and riflers, sighters and sight adjusters, smoothers, finishers, makers off, polishers, engravers, browners, lock freers, and and see the Proof House in Banbury Street. Established for public safety, as the inscription over the entrance says, was erected in 1813. And with the exception of one in London, is the only building of the kind in England. It is under the management of an independent corporation elected by and from members of the gun trade. More than 500,000 of barrels being proved within its walls yearly. The report for the year 1883 showing 383, 735 provisional proofs, and 297,704 definitive proofs. Of the barrels subjected to provisional proof, 29,794 were best birding single, 150, 176 best birding double, and 160,441 African. Of those proved definitively, 63,197 were best double birding barrels, 110, 369 breech-loading birding, 37,171 breech-loading choke bore, and 54,297 saddle pistol barrels. As an instance of the changes going on in the trades of the country, and as a contrast to the above figures, Birmingham formerly supplying nearly every firearm sold in England or exported from it, trade returns show that in 1882 Belgium imported 252, 850 guns and pistols, France 48,496, the United States 15,785, Holland 84,126, Italy 155,985, making, with 3,411 from other countries, 560, 653 firearms, valued at £124,813, rather a serious loss to the gun trade of Birmingham. Handcuffs and leg irons it is likely enough true that prior to the abolition of slavery shackles and chains were made here for use in the horrible traffic. But it was then a legal trade, and possibly the articles were classed as heavy steel toys, like the handcuffs and leg irons made by several firms now. A very heavy Australian order for these last named was executed here in 1853, and there is always a small demand for them. Hinges cast iron hinges, secret joint, were patented in 1775 by Messrs. Izon and Whitehurst, who afterwards removed to West Bromwich. The patent wrought iron hinge dates from 1840, since which year many improvements have been made in the manufacture of iron, brass, wire cast, wrought, pressed, and welded hinges, the makers numbering over 60. Hollowware, the invention of tinning iron pots and other hollowware, was patented in 1779 by Jonathan Taylor, the process being first carried out by Messrs. Izon and Whitehurst at their foundry in Duke Street. The enameling of hollowware was Mr. Hickling's patent, 1799, but his method was not very satisfactory, the present mode of enameling dating from another patent taken out in 1839. Messrs. Griffiths and Browett, Bradford Street, have the lion's share of the local trade, which is carried on to a much greater extent at Wolverhampton than here. Hydraulic machinery is the specialite almost solely of Messrs. Tange Bros, who established their Cornwall works in 1855. Jewelry. A deputation from Birmingham waited upon Prince Albert, May 28, 1845, at Buckingham Palace, for the purpose of appealing to Her Majesty, through His Royal Highness, to take into gracious consideration the then depressed condition of the operative jewelers of Birmingham, and entreating the Queen and Prince to set the example of wearing British jewelry on such occasions, and to such an extent as might meet the royal approval. The deputation took with them as presents for the Queen an armlet, a brooch, a pair of earrings, and a buckle for the waist. For the Prince Consort a watch chain, seal, and key, the value of the whole being over 400 guineas. The armlet, described by good judges as the most splendid thing ever produced in the town, brooch, earrings, chain, and key were made by Mr. Thomas Aston, Regent's Place. The buckle and seal, designed from the Warwick vase, by Mr. Bailney, St. Paul's Square. It was stated by the deputation that 5,000 families were dependent on the jewelry trades in Birmingham. The custom of trade, in connection with jewelers, and the public was formerly of the most arbitrary character. So much so indeed that at the Great Exhibition of 1851, the Birmingham jewelers did not exhibit, except through the London houses they were in the habit of supplying, and the specimens shewn by these middlemen were of a very unsatisfactory character as regards design. It is almost impossible to describe them without appearing to exaggerate. Construction in relation to use went for nothing. A group of Louis XIV's scrolls put together to form something like a brooch with a pin at the back to fasten it to the dress, which it rather disfigured than adorned. Heavy chain-like bracelet, pins, studs, and of the most hideous conceits imaginable, characterized the jewelry designs of Birmingham until about 1854-55, when a little more intelligence and enterprise was introduced, and our manufacturers learned that work well-designed sold even better than the old-styled ugliness. A great advance has taken place during the past 30 years, and Birmingham jewelers now stand foremost in all matters of taste and design. The workmen of today ranking as artists indeed, even the commonest gilt jewelry turned out by them now being of high-class design and frequently of most elaborate workmanship. At the present time, March 1885, the trade is in a very depressed condition, thousands of hands being out of employ or on short time, partly arising, no doubt, from one of those changes of fashion which at several periods of our local history have brought disaster to many of our industrial branches. It has been estimated that not more than one-half of the silver jewelry manufactured in Birmingham in 1883 passed through the assay office, but the total received there in the 12 months ending June 24, 1883, amounted to no less than 856,180 ounces, or 31 tons 17 cwt. 4 pounds. For Oz, the gold wares received during same period weighing 92,195 ounces, or 3 tons 7 cwt. 12 pounds. 3 Oz, the total number of articles sent in for assaying being 2,649,379. The Directory of 1780 gave the names of 26 jewelers. That of 1880 gives nearly 700, including cognate trades. The fashion of wearing long silver guard chains came in about 1806, the long gold ones dating a score years later, heavy fob chains then going out. The yearly make of wedding rings in Birmingham is put at 5,000 dozen. Precious stones are not to be included in the list of locally manufactured articles, nor yet Paris pastes, though very many thousands of pounds worth are used up every year, and those anxious to become possessed of such glittering trifles will find dealers here who can supply them with pearls from 6d, garnets from 2d, opals from 1s, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, amethysts, and from half a crown, the prices of all running up according to size and to hundreds of pounds per stone. Latin, the term given to thin sheets of brass, was formerly applied to sheets of tinned iron. Lockmakers are not so numerous here as they once were, though several well-known patentees still have their works in the borough. The general trade centers round Willenhall, Walsall, and Wolverhampton. Looking-glasses, Messrs. Hawkes, S. Romsgrove Street, is the largest looking-glass manufactory in the world, more than 300 hands being employed on the premises. A fire which took place Jan. 8, 1879, destroyed nearly 12,000 pounds worth of stock, the turnout of the establishment comprising all classes of mirrors, from those at 2 a dozen to 40 pounds or 50 pounds each. Medieval metalwork Mr. John Hardman, who had Pugin for his friend, was the first to introduce the manufacture of medieval and ecclesiastical metalwork in this town, opening his first factory in Great Charles Street in 1845. The exhibits at the old Bingley Hall in 1849 attracted great attention, and each national exhibition since has added to the triumphs of the firm. Messrs. Jones and Willis also take high rank. Metronome, an instrument for marking time, was invented by Mr. W. Heaton, a local musician, about 1817. Mineral waters, the oldest local establishment for the manufacture of aerated artificial and mineral waters, is that of Messrs. James Goff and Son, of Duke Street, the present proprietors of the Artesian Well in Allison Street. This well was formed some years ago by Mr. Clark, a London engineer, who had undertaken a corporation contract connected with the sewers. Finding himself embarrassed with the flow of water from the many springs about Park Street in Digbeth, he leased a small plot of land and formed a borehole, or artesian well, to check the percolation into his sewerage works. After boring about 400 feet, he reached a main spring in the red sandstone formation, which gives a constant flow of the purest water, winter and summer, of over 70,000 gals per day at the uniform temperature of 50 deg. The bore is only 4 in diameter and is doubly tubed the whole depth, the water rising into a 12 ft. Brick well, from which a 4,000-gallon tank is daily filled, the remainder passing through a fountain and down to the sewers as waste. Dr. Bostock Hill, the eminent analyst, reports most favorably upon the freedom of the water from all organic or other impurities, and is eminently fitted for all kinds of aerated waters, soda, potass, seltzer, lithia, and C, the old-fashioned water carriers who used to supply householders with Digbeth water from the old cock pump, by St. Martin's have long since departed. But Messrs. Goff's smart-looking barrel carts may be seen daily on their rounds, supplying the real aquapura to counters and bars frequented by those who like their cold without and like it good. Messrs. Barrett and Co. and Messrs. Kilby are also extensive manufacturers of these refreshing beverages. Nails no definite date can possibly be given as to the introduction of nail-making here as a separate trade. Most smiths, doubtless, doing more or less at it when every nail had to be beaten out on the anvil. That the town was dependent on outsiders for its main supplies 150 years back is evidenced by the Worcestershire nailers marching from Cradley and the Lye in 1737 to force the ironmongers to raise the prices. Machinery for cutting nails was tried as early as 1811, but it was a long while after that, 1856, before a machine was introduced successfully. Now there are but a few special sorts made otherwise, as the poor people of Cradley and the Lye Waste know to their cost, handmade nails now being seldom seen. Nettlefolds Limited. This, one of the most gigantic of our local companies, was registered in March 1880, the capital being £750,000 in shares of £10 each, with power to issue debentures to the vendors of the works purchased to the extent of £420,000. The various firms incorporated are those of Messrs. Nettlefolds at Heath Street and Prinsip Street, Birmingham at King's Norton at Smethwick, and C for the manufacture of screws, wire, and C, the Castle Ironworks at Hadley, Shropshire, and the collieries at Ketley in the same county, the Birmingham Screw Co. at Smethwick, the Manchester Steel Screw Co. at Bradford, Manchester, Mr. John Cornforth at Berkeley Street Wire and Wire Nail Works, and Messrs. Lloyd and Harrison at Stourport Screw Works. The purchase money for the various works amounted to £1,024, Messrs. Nettlefolds' share thereof being £786,000, the Birmingham Screw Co. £143,000, the Manchester Coast £50,000, Messrs. Cornforth, Lloyd, and Harrison taking the remainder. The firm's works in Heath Street are the most extensive of the kind in existence, the turnout being more than 200,000 gross of screws per week, nearly 250 tons of wire being used up in the same period. See screws. Nickel owes its introduction here to Mr. Askin, who, in 1832, succeeded in refining the crude ore by precipitation, previously it having been very difficult to bring it into use. Electroplating has caused a great demand for it. Nuts and bolts. In addition to a score or two of private firms engaged in the modern industry of nut and bolt making, there are several limited liability co's, the chief being the Patent Nut and Bolt Co. London Works, Smethwick, which started in 1863 with a capital of £400,000 in shares of £20 each. The last dividend on £14 paid up was at the rate of 10%, the reserve fund standing at £120,000. Messrs. Watkins and Keene and Weston and Grice incorporated with the patent in 1865. Other co's are the Midland Bolt and Nut Co., Fawdry Street, Smethwick, the Phoenix Bolt and Nut Co., Handsworth, the Patent Rivet Co., Rolfe Street, Smethwick, the Birmingham Bolt and Nut Co., and C. Optical and mathematical instruments of all kinds were manufactured here in large numbers 80 years ago, and many, such as the solar microscope, the kaleidoscope, and C, may be said to have had their origin in the workshops of Mr. Philip Carpenter and other makers in the first decade of the present century. The manufacture of these articles as a trade here is almost extinct. Papier-mâché. This manufacture was introduced here by Henry Clay in 1772, and being politic enough to present Queen Caroline with a sedan chair made of this material, he was patronized by the wealthy and titled of the day. the demand for his ware being so extensive that at one time he employed over 300 hands, his profit being something like £3 out of every £5. It has been stated that many articles of furniture, and made by him are still in use. Messrs. Jennens and Bettridge commenced in 1816, and improvements in the manufacture have been many and continuous. George Suter introduced pearl inlaying in 1825. Electrodeposit was applied in 1844. Gem inlaying in 1847 by Benge. Giles, aluminum and its bronze in 1864. The transfer process in 1856 by Tierne and Richmond. Paper pulp has been treated in a variety of ways for making button blanks, tray blanks, imitation jet, and the very dust caused by cutting it up being again utilized by mixture with certain cements to form brooches, and paraffin. The manufacture of lamps for the burning of this material dates only from 1861. Pins. What becomes of all the pins? 40 years ago it was stated that 20 million pins were made every day, either for home or export use. But the total is now put at 50 million, notwithstanding which one can hardly be in the company of man, woman, or child for a day without being asked, "Have you such a thing as a pin about you?" Pins were first manufactured here in quantities about 1750, the Ryland family having the honor of introducing the trade. It formerly took 14 different persons to manufacture a single pin, cutters, headers, pointers, polishers, and but now the whole process is performed by machinery. The proportion of pins made in Birmingham is put at 37 million per day, the weight of brass wire annually required being 1,850,000 pounds. Value £84,791. Iron wire to the value of £5,016 is used for mourning and hairpins. The census reports say there are but 729 persons employed, of whom 495 are females, in the manufacture of the 11,500,000,000 pins sent from our factories every year. Plains carpenters' planes were supplied to our factors in 1760 by William Moss, and his descendants were in the business as late as 1844. Messrs. Atkins and Sons have long been celebrated makers, their hundreds of patterns including all kinds that could possibly be desired by the workman. Woodwork is so cut, carved, and molded by machinery now that these articles are not so much in demand, and the local firms who make them number only a dozen. Plated ware. Soho was celebrated for its plated wares as early as 1766. Mr. Thomason, afterward Sir Edward, commenced the plating in 1796. And Messrs. Waterhouse and Ryland, another well-known firm in the same line, about 1808, the material used being silver rolled on copper, the mounting silver in good work, often solid silver. The Directory of 1780 enumerates 46 platers, that of 1799-96 ditto. Their names might now be counted on one's finger ends, the modern electroplating having revolutionized the business, vastly to the prosperity of the town. Puzzles. The Yankee puzzle game of 15 took so well when introduced into this country, summer of 1880, that one of our local manufacturers received an order to supply 10,000 gross, and he was clever enough to construct a machine that made 20 sets per minute. Railway wagon works. With the exception of the carriage building works belonging to the several great railway companies, Saltley may be said to be the headquarters of this modern branch of industry, in which thousands of hands are employed. The Midland Railway Carriage and Wagon Co. was formed in 1853 and has works of a smaller scale at Shrewsbury. The Metropolitan Railway Carriage and Wagon Co. was originated in London in 1845, but removed to Saltley in 1862, which year also saw the formation of the Union Rolling Stock Co. The capital invested in the several companies is very large, and the yearly value sent out is in proportion, more rolling stock being manufactured here than in all the other towns in the kingdom put together, not including the works of the railway companies themselves. Many magnificent palaces on wheels have been made here for foreign potentates, emperors, kings and queens, sultans and kaisers, from every clime that the iron horse has traveled in, as well as all sorts of passenger cars, from the little narrow-gauge vehicles of the Festiniog line, on which the travelers must sit back to back, to the 60 ft. long sleeping cars used on the Pacific and Buenos Aires Railway, in each compartment of which 8 individuals can find sleeping accommodation equal to that provided at many of the best hotels, or the curious-looking cars used on Indian railways, wherein the natives squat in tiers, or, as the sailor would say, with an upper and lower deck. Rope-making is a trade carried on in many places, but there are few establishments that can equal the Universe Works in Garrison Lane, where, in addition to hundreds of tons of twine and cord, there are manufactured all sorts of wire and hemp ropes for colliery and other purposes, ocean telegraph cables included. Messrs. Wright introduced strain machinery early in 1853, and in the following year they patented a rope made of best hemp and galvanized wire spun together by machinery. On a test one of these novelties, 414 in circumference, attached to 2 engines, drew a train of 300 tons weight. To supply the demand for galvanized signaling and fencing cords, the machines must turn out 15,000 yards of strand per day. Rule-making, though formerly carried on in several places, is now almost confined to this town and the metropolis, and as with jewelry so with rules, very much of what is called London work is, in reality, the produce of Birmingham. Messrs. Rabone Brothers are the principal makers, and the boxwood used is mostly obtained from Turkey and the Levant, but the firm does not confine itself solely to the manufacture of wood rules, their steel tapes, made up to 200 ft in one length, without join of any sort, being a specialty highly appreciated by surveyors and others. Saddlery, one of the oldest local trades, as Lalaude in 1538 speaks of Lorimers as being numerous then. That there was an important leather market is certain. Hutton thought it had existed for 700 years, and we read of leather sealers among the local officers as well as of a leather hall at the east end of New Street. The trade has more than quadrupled during the last 25 years, about 3,000 hands being now engaged therein, in addition to hundreds of machines. Screws in olden days, the threads of a screw had to be filed out by hand, and the head struck up on the anvil. The next step was to turn them in a lathe, but in 1849, a Jerram clockmaker invented a machine by which females could make them 5 times as fast as the most skillful workmen, and, as usual, the supply created a demand. The trade for a few years received many additions, and the screw girders, as the hard-working lasses were called, were to be met with in many parts of the town. 1852, 1,500 hands were employed, the output being from 20 to 25 tons per week, or 2 million gross per year. Gradually, however, by the introduction and patenting of many improvements in the machinery, the girls were, in a great measure, dispensed with, and their employers as well, Messrs. Nettlefold and Chamberlain having, in 1865, nearly the whole trade in their hands, and sending out 150,000 gross of screws per week. Nearly 2,000 people are employed at Nettlefolds, including women and girls, who feed and attend the screw and nail-making machines. Notwithstanding the really complicated workings of the machines, the making of a screw seems to a casual visitor but a simple thing. From a coil of wire, a piece is cut of the right length by one machine, which roughly forms a head and passes it onto another, in which the blank has its head nicely shaped, shaved, and nicked by a revolving saw. It then passes by an automatic feeder into the next machine, where it is pointed and wormed, and sent to be shook clear of the swath of shaving cut out for the worm. Washing and polishing in revolving barrels precedes the examination of every single screw, a machine placing them one by one so that none can be missed sight of. Most of the 2,000 machines in use are of American invention, but improved and extended, all machinery and tools of every description being made by the firm's own workpeople. Sewing machines, the various improvements in these machines patented by Birmingham makers may be counted by the gross, and the machines sent out every year by the thousands. The buttonhole machine was the invention of Mr. Clements. Sheathing metal in a newspaper called The World, dated April 16, 1791, was an advertisement beginning thus, by the King's patent, tinned copper sheets and pipes manufactured and sold by Charles Wyatt, Birmingham, and at 19, Upchurch Lane, London. It was particularly recommended for sheathing of ships, as the tin coating would prevent the corrosion of the copper and operate as a preservative of the iron placed contiguous to it. Though an exceedingly clever man, and the son of one of Birmingham's famed worthies, Mr. Charles Wyatt was not fortunate in many of his inventions, and his tinned copper brought him in neither silver nor gold. What is now known as sheathing or yellow metal is a mixture of copper, zinc, and iron in certain defined proportions, according as it is Munce's metal or Green's Pat and C. Several patents were taken out in 1779, 1800, and at later dates, and as is usual with good things, there has been sufficient squabbling over sheathing to provide a number of legal bigwigs with considerable quantities of the yellow metal they prefer. George Frederick Muntz, MP, if not the direct inventor, had the lion's share of profit in the manufacture, as the goodwill of his business was sold for £40,000 in 1863, at which time it was estimated that 11,000 tons of Muntz's mixture was annually made into sheathing, ship's bolts, and to the value of over £800,000. The business was taken to by a limited liability company, whose capital in March 1884 was £180,000, on which a 10% dividend was realized. Elliott's Patent Sheathing and Metal Co. was formed in 1862. Snuff boxes 100 years ago, when snuff-taking was the mode, the manufacture of japanned, gilt, and other snuff boxes gave employment to large numbers here. Of one of these workmen, it is recorded that he earned £3.10 per week painting snuff boxes at 1/4d each. The first mention of their being made here is in 1693. Soap in more ways than one. There is a vast deal of soft soap used in Birmingham, but its inhabitants ought to be cleanly people, for the 2 or 3 manufactories of hard yellow and mottled in and near the town turn out an annual supply of over 3,000 tons. Spectacles 60 and 70 years ago, spectacles were sent out by the gross to all part of the country, but they were of a kind now known as goggles, the frames being large and clumsy, and made of silver, white metal, or tortoiseshell, the fine steel wire frames now used not being introduced until about 1840. Stereoscopes, the invention of Sir David Brewster, were first made in this town, Mr. Robert Field producing them. Steel pens, though contrary to the general belief, metallic pens are of very ancient origin. Dr. Martin Lister, in his book of travels published in 1699, described a very curious and antique writing instrument made of thick and strong silver wire, wound up like a hollow bottom or screw, with both the ends pointing one way and at a distance, so that a man might easily put his forefinger between the 2 points, and the screw fills the ball of his hand. One of the points was the point of a bodkin, which was to write on wax tables. The other point was made very artificially, like the head and upper beak of a cock, and the point divided in 2, just like our steel pens, from whence undoubtedly the moderns had their patterns, which are now made also of fine silver or gold or prince's metal, all of which yet want a spring and are therefore not so useful as of steel or a quill. But the quill soon spoils. Steel is undoubtedly the best, and if you use China ink, the most lasting of all inks, it never rusts the pen, but rather preserves it with a kind of varnish, which dries upon it, though you take no care in wiping it. Though Messrs. Gillott and Sons Victoria Works, Graham Street, stands first among the pen-making establishments open to the visit of strangers, it is by no means the only manufactory whereat the useful little steel pen is made in large quantities, there being besides Mr. John Mitchell, Newhall Street, Mr. William Mitchell, Cumberland Street, Hinks, Wells & Co., Buckingham Street, Brandower & Co., New John Street, West, Baker and Finnemore, James Street, G.W. Hughes, St. Paul's Square, Leonard & Co., Charlotte Street, Myers & Son, Charlotte Street, Perry & Co., Lancaster Street, Ryland & Co., St. Paul's Square, Sansom & Co., Tenby Street, and C, the gross aggregate output of the trade at large being estimated at 20 tons per week. Stirrups. According to the directory, there are but 4 stirrup makers here, though it is said there are 4,000 different patterns of the article. Swords. Some writers aver that Birmingham was the center of the metal works of the ancient Britons, where the swords and the scythe blades were made to meet Julius Caesar. During the Commonwealth, over 15,000 swords were said to have been made in Birmingham for the parliamentary soldiers. But if they thus helped to overthrow the Stuarts at that period, the Brummagem boys in 1745 were willing to make out for it by supplying Prince Charlie with as many as ever he could pay for, and the basket hilts were at a premium. Disloyalty did not always prosper, though, for on one occasion over 2,000 cutlasses intended for the prince were seized en route and found their way into the hands of his enemies. Not many swords are made in Birmingham at the present time, unless matchets and case knives used in the plantations can be included under that head. Thimbles, or thumbells, from being originally worn on the thumb, are said by the Dutch to have been the invention of Mynheer van Banscote for the protection of his ladylove's fingers when employed at the embroidery frame. But though the good people of Amsterdam last year, 1884, celebrated the bicentenary of their gallant thimble-making goldsmith, it is more than probable that he filched the idea from a Birmingham man, for Shakespeare had been dead 68 years prior to 1684, and he made mention of thimbles as quite a common possession of all ladies in his time. For your own ladies and pale-visaged maids like Amazons come tripping after drums, their thimbles into armed gauntlets change, their kneeleds to lances. King John Act 5, SC 3. Thou least, thou thread, thou thimble, and that I'll prove upon thee, though thy little finger be armed in a thimble. Taming of the Shrew, Act 4 SC 3. The earliest note we really have of thimbles being manufactured in Birmingham dates as 1695. A very large trade is now done in steel, brass, gold, and silver. Thread strange are the mutations of trade. The first thread of cotton spun by rollers, long before Arkwright's time, was made near this town in the year 1700, and a little factory was at work in the Upper Priory. The motive power being 2 donkeys, in 1740, under the ingenious John Wyatt, with whom were other 2 well-remembered local worthies Lewis Paul and Thomas Warren. Many improvements were made in the simple machinery, but fate did not intend Birmingham to rival Bradford, and the thread-making came to an end in 1792. Tinderboxes with the accompanying fire steels are still made here for certain foreign markets, where lucifers are not procurable. Tinning iron pots were first tinned in 1779 under Jonathan Taylor's patent. Tinning wire is one of the branches of trade rapidly going out, partly through the introduction of the galvanizing process, but latterly in consequence of the invention of screw, ball, and other bottle stoppers. There were but 5 or 6 firms engaged in it 10 years back, but the then demand for bottling wire may be gathered from the fact that one individual, with the aid of 2 helpers, covered with the lighter-colored metal about 2 cwt. of slender iron wire per day. This would give a total length of about 6,500 miles per annum, enough to tie up 25,718,784 bottles of pop, and c. Tools. The making of tools for the workers in our almost countless trades has given employ to many thousands, but in addition thereto is the separate manufacture of heavy-edge tools. Light-edge tools, such as table and pocket knives, scissors, gravers, and c, are not made here, though heavy tools comprising axes, hatchets, cleavers, hoes, spades, mattocks, forks, chisels, plane irons, machine knives, scythes, and c, in endless variety and of hundreds of patterns, suited to the various parts of the world for which they are required. Over 4,000 hands are employed in this manufacture. Tubes, immense quantities, estimated at over 15,000 tons, of copper, brass, iron, and other metal tubing are annually sent out of our workshops. In olden days, the manufacture of brass and copper tubes was by the tedious process of rolling up a strip of metal and soldering the edges together. In 1803, Sir Edward Thomason introduced the patent tube iron body with brass coating, but it was not until 1838 that Mr. Charles Green took out his patent for seamless tubes, which was much improved upon in 1852 by G. F. Muntz, Junner, as well as by Mr. Those. Atwood in 1850, with respect to the drawing of copper tubes. The Peyton and Peyton Tube Co., London Works, was registered June 25, 1878, capital £50,000 in £5 shares. Messrs. Peyton received 1,000 paid-up shares for their patent for machinery for manufacturing welded and other tubes, £3,500 for plant and tools, the stock going at valuation. Teutania metal took its name from Teuton, the inventor. It was much used 100 years ago in the manufacture of buckles. Umbrella's the name of the man who first carried an umbrella in this town, about the year 1780, has not yet been enrolled among our Birmingham worthies. but he must have been known to some of our fathers, for it is not much more than 100 years ago since Jonas Hanway walked down the Strand, shielding his wig from the wet with the first umbrella scene in London. The metal work required for setting up, technically called furniture, has long been made here, and gives employment to about 1,700 hands, 2/3 of whom are females. Vinegar, Farden's Vinegar Brewery, Glover Street, is worth a visit, if only to look at their 5 vats, each upwards of 30 ft. high and 24 ft. in diameter, and each capable of storing 58,000 gallons. But besides these, among the largest of their kind in the world, there are 1324,000 gallons vats, 5 15,000, and 27 10,000. Vitriol. The oil of vitriol in 1800 was reduced from 3s per lb to 1s. In 1865 it was sold at 1d. Watchmaking. Few names of eminent horologists are to be found in the lists of departed tradesmen. So few, indeed, that watchmaking would seem to have been one of the unknown arts, if such a thing was possible at any period of the last 200 years of Birmingham history. Messrs. Brunner, Smallbrook Street, Swindon Temple Street, and Ehrart Bar Street West take the lead at present among private firms, but the introduction of a watch manufactory is due to Mr. A. L. Denison, who, though not the originator of the notion, after establishing factories in America, in or about 1850, and Switzerland, came to this country in 1871, and with other gentlemen in the following year started the Anglo-American Watch Co., Limited, a factory being erected in Villa Street. The trade of the Co. was principally with America, which was supplied with machine-made works, from here until the Waltham, Elgin, and other firms over there beat them out of the market, a not very difficult operation, considering that our fair trading cousins impose a 25% duty on all such goods sent there by the free traders of this country. The Villa Street establishment was purchased in 1875 by Mr. William Bragg, who developed the business under the name of the English Watch Co., the manufacture being confined almost solely to English lever watches, large and small-sized, key-winding and keyless. In January 1882, Mr. Bragg, for the sum of £21,000, parted with the business, plant, stock, and premises to the present English Watch Co. Limited, which has a registered capital of £50,000 in shares of 10 each, the dividend, June 1884, being at the rate of 6%. On paid-up capital in April 1883, the prospectus of the English Double Chronograph Co., Limited, was issued, the capital being £50,000 in 10 shares, the object of the company being to purchase, for £15,000, and work the patents granted to Mr. W. H. Douglas, of Stourbridge, for improvements in chronographs, the improvements being of such a nature that ordinary keyless English levers can be turned into double chronographs at a trifling cost. Whip-making, as a trade distinct from saddlery, dates from about 1750, and it received a great impetus by the introduction, in 1780, of a machine by Matthew Dean for the easier manipulation of the leather thongs. Whistles of all sizes and sorts, from the child's tin whistle to the huge and powerful steam whistles used on board the American liners, are made in this town, and it might be imagined there could be but little novelty in any new design. This, however, is not the case, for when the authorities of Scotland Yard, June 1884, desired a new police whistle, samples were sent in from many parts of the country, from America, and from the continent. The order, which was for 40,000, was secured by Messrs. J. Hudson and Co., Buckingham Street, and so distinct is the speciality that 50 other places have followed the example of the metropolis. Wire drawing, which formerly had to be done by hand, does not appear to have been made into a special trade earlier than the beginning of the 18th century. The first wire mill we read of being that of Penn's, near Sutton Coldfield, which was converted from an iron forge in 1720. Steel wire was not made till some little time after that date. The increased demand for iron and steel wire which has taken place during the last 35 years is almost incredible, the make in 1850 being not more than 100 tons. In 1865 it was calculated at 2,000 tons, in 1875 it was put at 12,000 tons, while now it is estimated to equal 30,000 tons. In March 1853, a piece of No. 16 copper wire was shown at Mr. Samuel Walker's in one piece, 3 miles long, drawn from a bar 6/8 ths in diameter. Originally, the bar weighed 128 pounds, but it lost 14 pounds in the process, and it was then thought a most remarkable production, but far more wonderful specimens of wire spinning have since been exhibited. A wire rope weighing over 70 tons was made in 1876 at the Universe Works of Messrs. Wright, who are the patentees of the mixed wire and hemp rope. Bird cages, meat covers, mouse traps, wire blinds, wire nails, wire latticing, and we have long been used to. Even girding the earth with land and ocean telegraph wire, or fencing in square miles at a time of prairie land, with wire strong enough to keep a herd of a few thousand buffaloes in range, are no longer novelties, but to shape, sharpen, and polish a serviceable pair of penny scissors out of a bit of steel wire by 2 blows and the push of a machine is something new, and it is Nettlefold's latest. Wire nails, staples, and are made at Nettlefold's by machinery much in advance of what can be seen elsewhere. In the nail mill, the Paris points, as wire nails are called, are cut from the coil of wire by the first motion of the machine as it is fed in, then headed and pointed at one operation, sizes up to 1 inch being turned out at the rate of 360 a minute. In the manufacture of spikes, the punch for making the head is propelled by springs, which are compressed by a cam, and then released at each stroke. 2 cutters worked by side cams on the same shaft cut off the wire and make the point. A steel finger then advances and knocks the finished spike out of the way to make room for the next. Wire staples, 3 inches long, are turned out at the rate of 100 a minute. The wire is pushed forward into the machine and cut off on the bevel to form the points. A hook rises, catches the wire, and draws it down into the proper form when a staple falls out complete. Wire gauge. The following table shows the sizes, weights, lengths, and breaking strains of iron wire under the Imperial Standard Wire Gauge, which came into operation March 1, 1884. Size, diameter, sectional weight of length, breaking strains on area in of wire inch mil SQ, 100 mile CWT. Annealed bright gauge meters, inches, yards, pounds, ids, pounds, 7/0, 500, 7, 3404 6/0, 464, 8, 2935/0, 432. 1466. For 2540 14/0, 400, 2179 3/0, 1885 2/0, 348 8, 1649 1/0, 342 2, 1429 1, 300, 6, 0598, 6 1225 2. 276. 1037 3, 252 4, 864 4, 0423 6 732 5, 212 4, 0365, 8 612 6, 192 9, 0290, 5 527, 8, 0201, 8 348 9, 144, 7. 10, 0129, 7 223 11, 116. 0106, 4 183 1077 12, 104, 6, 148 1333 13, 0066, 5 114 1723 14, 080, 2240 15, 2816, 3517, 056 4, 4667 18, 6222 19, 040, 9333 20, 036, 9, 0010, 11,200. Yates. At one period, this was the favorite slang term of the smashing fraternity for the metal used in their nefarious business, the spoons manufactured by Messrs. Yates and Son being the best material for transmutation into base coin. Trafalgar, see Nelson and statues. Train bands. The train bands of former days may be likened to the militia of the present time, but were drawn from every parish in the hundreds, according to the population. A document in the Lost Staunton collection gave the names and parishes of the men forming Lord Compton's company of foot for the 100 of Hemlingford in 1615, being part of the Warwickshire Treyu bands. Birmingham supplied 6 men armed with pikes and 6 with muskets, Birmingham and Aston jointly the same number, Edgbaston 1 pike, Coleshill 3 of each, Sutton Coldfield 4 pikes and 6 muskets, Solihull 3 pikes and 4 muskets, Knowle the same, Berkswell 2 pikes and 5 muskets, and Meriden 1 pike and 2 muskets. These trained bands numbered 6 men from Coventry and the county in 1642, besides the militia and volunteers of Warwickshire, which were called up in that year. These latter mustered very strongly on the days for review and training, there being at Stratford-upon-Avon, June 30, 400 volunteers well armed and 200 unarmed. At Warwick, July 1 and 2, 650 well armed. At Coleshill, July 4, 8 almost all well armed. And at Coventry near 800, most well armed, the total number being 2,850, making a respectable force of 3,450 in all, ready, according to the expression of their officers, to adhere to His Majesty and both Houses of Parliament, to the loss of the last drop of their dearest blood. These fine words, however, did not prevent the volunteers of this neighborhood opposing His Majesty to the utmost of their power soon afterwards. Tramways these take their name from Mr. Outram, who, in 1802, introduced the system of lightning carriage by running the vehicles on rail in the north of England. The first suggestion of a local tramway came through Mr. G.F. Train, who, not finding scope sufficient for his abilities in America, paid Birmingham a visit, and after yarning us well asked and obtained permission Aug. 7, 1860, to lay down tram rails in some of the principal thoroughfares, but as his glib tongue failed in procuring the needful capital, his scheme was a thorough failure. Some 10 years after the notion was taken up by a few local gentlemen, and at a public meeting on December 27, 1871, the town council were authorized to make such tramways as they thought to be necessary, a company being formed to work them. This company was rather before its time, though now it would be considered, if anything, rather backward. The first line of rails brought into use was laid from the bottom of Hockley Hill to Dudley Port, and it was opened May 20, 1872. From Hockley to top of Snow Hill, the cars began to run September 7, 1873. The Bristol Road line being first used May 30, though formally opened June 5, 1876. The Birmingham and District Tramway Company's lines cost about £65,000, and they paid the corporation £910 per year rental. But in May 1877, their interest was bought up by the Birmingham Tramway and Omnibus Company for the sum of £25,000, the original cost of the property thus acquired being £115,000. The new company leased the borough lines for 7 years at £1,680 per annum, and gave up the out-district portion of the original undertaking. That they have been tolerably successful is shown by the fact that in 1883, the receipts from passengers amounted to £39,859, while the owners of the £10 shares received a dividend of 15%. The authorized capital of the company is £60,000, of which £33,600 has been called up. The Aston line from Corporation Street to the lower grounds was opened for traffic the day after Christmas, 1882. The company's capital is £50,000, of which nearly one half was expended on the road alone. This was the first tramway on which steam was used as the motive power, though Downs' locomotive was tried, Jan. 8, 1876, between Handsworth and West Bromwich, and Hughes's between Monmouth Street and Bournebrook on July 2, 1880, the latter distance being covered in 25 minutes with a carload of passengers attached to the engine. The next company to be formed was Thaw South Staffordshire and Birmingham District Steam Tramway Co., who broke ground July 26, 1882, and opened their first section, about 7 miles in length, from Handsworth to Darlaston, June 25, 1883. This line connects Birmingham with West Bromwich, Wednesbury, Great Bridge, Dudley, Walsall, and intermediate places, and is worked with 40-horsepower engines of Wilkinson's make. The Birmingham and West Suburban Tramways coast lines, commencing in Station Street run, by means of branches from several parts to various of the suburbs. First, by way of Pershore Street, Moat Row, Bradford Street, and Moseley Road to Moseley. Second, by way of De Rytland, Bordesley, Camp Hill, along Stratford Road to Sparkhill. Third, leaving Stratford Road at the Mermaid, and along Warwick Road to Accock's Green. Fourth, striking off at Bordesley, along the Coventry Road to the far side of Small Heath Park. Fifth, from Moat Row, by way of Smithfield Street to Park Street, Dudeston Row, Curzon Street, Vauxhall Road to Nechells Park Road. Sixth, in the same direction, by way of Gosta Green, Lister Street, and Great Lister Street, using running powers over the Aston line where necessary on the last named and following routes. Seventh, from Corporation Street, along Aston Street, Lancaster Street, Newtown Row, up the Birchfield Road. Eighth, from Six Ways, Birchfield, along the Losels Road to Villa Cross, and from the Losels Road along Wheeler Street to Constitution Hill, forming a junction with the original Hockley and Snow Hill line. The system of lines projected by the Western Districts Co. include: first, commencing in Edmund Street, near the Great Western Railway Station, along Congreve Street, Summer Row, Parade, Frederick Street, and Vyse Street to join the Hockley line. Second, as before to Parade, along the Sandpits, Spring Hill to Borough Boundary in Dudley Road, and along Heath Street to Smethwick. Third, as before to Spring Hill, thence in one direction along Monument Road to Hagley Road, and in the opposite direction along Eichnild Street to Hockley. Fourth, starting from Lower Temple Street along Hill Street, Hurst Street, Sherlock Street to the Borough Boundary and Pershore Road, and from Sherlock Street by way of Gooch Street to Balsall Heath. Fifth, by way of Holloway Head, Bath Row, and Islington to the Five Ways. The whole of the lines now in use and being constructed in the borough are the property of the corporation, who lease them to the several companies, the latter making the lines outside the borough themselves and keeping them in repair. The average cost of laying down is put at 50s per yard for single line, or £5 per yard for double lines, the cost of the metal rail itself being about 20s per yard. Trees in streets, though, a few trees were planted along the Bristol Road in 1853, and a few others later in some of the outskirts. The system cannot be fairly said to have started till the spring of 1876, when about 100 plane trees were planted in Broad Street, 100 limes in Bristol Street, 20 Canadian poplars in St. Martin's Churchyard, a score or so of plane trees near Central Station, and a number in Gosta Green and the various playgrounds belonging to board schools, a few elms, sycamores, and Ontario poplars being mixed with them. As a matter of historical fact, the first were put in the ground Nov. 29, 1885, in Stephenson Place. Tunnels. The tunnel on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, near King's Norton, is 2,695 yards long, perfectly straight, 17-1/2 ft. wide, and 18 ft. high. In the center, a basin is excavated sufficiently wide for barges to pass without inconvenience, and in this underground chamber in August, 1795, the Royal Arch-Masons held a regular chapter of their order, rather an archway of celebrating the completion of the undertaking. The other tunnels on this canal are 110, 120, 406, and 524 yards in length. On the old Birmingham Canal there are two, one being 200 yards long and the other 1,010 yards. On the London and Birmingham Railway, now London and North Western, the Watford Tunnel is 1,830 yards long, the Kisley Tunnel 2,423 yards, and Primrose Hill 1,250 yards. On the Great Western Line, the longest is the Box Tunnel, 3,123 yards in length. The deepest tunnel in England pierces the hills between Great Malvern and Herefordshire, being 600 ft. From the rails to the surface, it is 1,560 yards in length. The longest tunnels in the country run under the range of hills between Marston in Yorkshire and Diggle in Lancashire, two being for railway and one canal use. One of the former is 5,434 yards, and the other, Stainage, on the L and in W, 5,435 yards long, while the canal tunnel is 5,451 yards. Turnpike gates. At one time there were gates or bars on nearly every road out of the town. Even at the bottom of Worcester Street, there was a bar across the road in 1818. There was once a gate at the junction of Hanksman Lane, our Great Hampton Row, and Constitution Hill, which, being shifted further on, to about the spot where Green and Cadbury's works now are, remained till 1839. The gate in De Rytland was removed in August, 1828. The one at Five Ways July 5, 1841. Those at Small Heath at Sparkbrook in the Moseley Road and in the Hagley Road were all freed in 1851, and the sites of the toll houses sold in 1853. In the good old coaching days, the turnpike tolls paid on a coach running daily from here to London amounted to £1,428 per year. Union Passage, at first but a field path out of the yard of the Crown Tavern to the Cherry Orchard, afterwards a narrow entry as far as Crooked Lane, with a house only at each end, was opened up and widened in 1823 by Mr. Jones, who built the Pantechnetheca. Near the Ball Street end was the old bear yard, the premises of a dealer in dogs, rabbits, pigeons, and other pets, who kept a big brown bear, which was taken out whenever the Black Country boys wanted a bear baiting. The game was put a stop to in 1835, but the cage was there in 1841, about which time the passage became built up on both sides throughout. Vaughton's Holland unfortunate soldier fell into a deep clay pit here in July 1857 and was drowned. And about a month after August's 6A horse and cart, laden with street sweepings, was backed too near the edge, overturned, and sank to the bottom of 60 feet deep of water. The place was named after a very old local family who owned considerable property in the neighborhood of Gooch Street, and though the descendants are known as Houghtons. Vauxhall, in an old book descriptive of a tour through England in 1766, it is mentioned that near Birmingham there is a seat belonging to Sir Lisson Holt, Bart, but now let out for a public house opened June 4, 1758, where are gardens, and with an organ and other music in imitation of Vauxhall, by which name it goes in the neighborhood. The old place, having been purchased by the Victoria Land Society, was closed by a farewell dinner and ball, September 16, 1850, the first stroke of the axe to the trees being given at the finish of the ball, 6 a.m. next morning. In the days of its prime, before busy bustling Birmingham pushed up to its walls, it ranked as one of the finest places of amusement anywhere out of London. The following verse, one of 5, is from an impromptu written by Edward Farmer in one of the alcoves at Old Vauxhall, March 6, 1850. There's scarce a heart that will not start, no matter what its rank and station, and heave a sigh when they destroy this favorite place of recreation. If we look back on memory's track, what joyous scenes we can recall of happy hours in its gay bowers, and friends we met at Old Vauxhall. Velocipedes we call them, cycles nowadays, but in 1816-20 they were dandy horses, and in the words of a street billet of the period, the hobby horse was all the go in country and in town. Views of Birmingham. The earliest date view of the town appears to be the one given in Dugdale's Warwickshire, of 1656, and entitled The Prospect of Birmingham, from Ravenhurst near London Road, in the southeast part of the town. Villa Cross was originally built for and occupied as a school, and known as Aston Villa School. Visitors of distinction in the old Soho days were not at all rare, though they had not the advantages of traveling by rail. Every event of the kind, however, was duly chronicled in the Gazette, but they must be men of superior mark indeed, or peculiarly notorious perhaps, for their movements to be noted nowadays. Besides the royalties noted elsewhere, we were honored with the presence of the Chinese Commissioner Pintagen, May 7, 1866, and His Excellency the Chinese Minister Custa Gen, January 23, 1878. Japanese ambassadors were here May 20, 1862, and again November 1, 1872. The Burmese ambassadors took a look at us August 14, 1872, and the Madagascar ambassadors followed on January 5, 1883. Among the brave and gallant visitors who have noted are General Elliot, who came August 29, 1787. Lord Nelson, August 30, 1802, and there is an old Harbornate still living who says he can recollect seeing the hero come out of the hotel in Temple Row. The Duke of Wellington and Sir Robert Peel dined at Dee's Hotel, September 23, 1830. The Duke's old opponent, Marshal Soult, in July 1833, seemed particularly interested in the work going on among our gun shops. Lady Havelock, her 2 daughters, and General Havelock, the only surviving brother of Sir Henry, visited the town October 8, 1858. General Ulysses Grant, American ex-president, was soft-soaped at the town hall, October 19. 1877 politicians include Daniel O'Connell, January 20, 1832. The Right Hun. Benjamin Disraeli, who visited the small arms factory August 18, 1869, was again here August 22, 1876, immediately after being raised to the peerage as Earl of Beaconsfield. The Right Hun. W.E. Gladstone was welcomed with a procession and a monster meeting at Bingley Hall. May 31, 1877. The Right Hun. R.A. Cross, Home Secretary, honored the Conservatives by attending a banquet in the Town Hall, Nov. 20, 1876. Sir Stafford Northcote, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, came here Oct. 19, 1878, and was at Aston, Oct. 13, 1884, when the Radical roughs made themselves conspicuous. Lord Randolph Churchill was introduced to the Burgesses, April 15, 1884, and has been here many times since, as well as the late Col Burnaby, who commenced his candidature for the representation of the borough July 23, 1878. In the long list of learned and literary visitors occur the names of John Wesley, who first came here in March, 1738, and preached on Gosta Green in 1743. Whitfield preached here in Oct. 1753. Benjamin Franklin was in Birmingham in 1758, and for long afterwards corresponded with Baskerville and Bolton. Fulton, the American engineer, originally a painter, studied here in 1795. Washington Irving, whose sister was married to Mr. Henry Van Wart, spent a long visit here, during the course of which he wrote the series of charming tales comprised in his sketchbook. His Bracebridge Hall, if not written, was conceived here, our Aston Hall being the prototype of the hall, and the Bracebridge family of Atherstone found some of the characters. Thomas Carlyle was here in 1824. Mr. and Mrs. Beecher Stowe. Uncle Tom's Cabin, in May 1853. Sir W. Crofton, Oct. 9, 1862. M. Chevalier, April 28, 1875. Mr. Ruskin, July 14, 1877. Reverend Dr. Punshon, March 19, and J. A. Froude, M.A., March 18, 1878. Mr. Archibald Forbes, April 29, 1878. H. M. Stanley, Nov. 6, 1878. Bret Harte, April 7, 1879. The Reverend T. DeWitt Talmage, an American preacher of great note, lectured in Town Hall June 9 and July 7, 1879 on the bright side of things and on big blunders. But taking the brightest view he could, he afterwards acknowledged that his coming here was the biggest blunder he had ever made. Oscar Wilde, March 13, 1884. Lola Montes lectured here March 24, 1859. Dr. Kenneally was here June 26, 1875. The Tichborne claimant showed himself at the Town Hall, August 26, 1872, and again, after his exile, at the Birmingham Concert Hall, Jan. 12, 1885. Volunteers in the Olden Time meeting was held October 5, 1745, for the raising of a regiment of volunteers to oppose the Scotch rebels, but history does not chronicle any daring exploits by this regiment. Playing at soldiers would seem to have been formerly a more popular, or shall we say patriotic, amusement than of late years, for it is recorded that a local corps was organized in August, 1782, but we suppose it was disbanded soon after, as in 1797, when the threatening times of revolution alarmed our peaceful sires. There were formed in Birmingham 2 companies, one of horse and one of foot, each 500 strong, under the commands of Capt. Pearson and Lord Brooke. They were called the Birmingham Loyal Association of Volunteers, and held their first parade in Coleshill Street, August 15, 1797. On the 4th of June, following, a grand review was held on Birmingham Heath, then unenclosed, to the delight of the local belles, who knew not which the most to admire, the Scarlet Horse or the Blue Foot. Over 100,000 spectators were said to have been present, and, strangest thing of all, the volunteers were armed with muskets brought from Prussia. The corps had the honor of escorting Lord Nelson when, with Lady Hamilton, he visited the town in 1802. At a review on August 2, 1804, the regiment were presented with its colors, and for years the Loyals were the most popular men of the period. Our neighbors do not seem to have been more backward than the locals, though why it was necessary that the services of the Handsworth Volunteer Cavalry should be required to charge and put to flight the rioters in Snow Hill, May 29, 1810, is not very clear. See also, train bands. Volunteers of the present day. The first official enrollment of volunteers of the present corps was dated Nov. 25, 1859, though a list of names was on paper some 3 months earlier. Unlike sundry other movements which are now of a national character, that for the formation of a volunteer army was so far from having a local origin, that for a long time it was viewed with anything but favor in Birmingham. And though it is not pleasant to record the fact, it was not until the little parish of Handsworth had raised its corps of the 1st Staffordshire that the Brums really stepped into the ranks. Properly, the natal day should be reckoned as the 14th of December, 1859, when a town's meeting was held for the purpose of adopting such measures as might seem desirable for placing Birmingham in its proper position with regard to the great national rifle movement. The Hun. Charles Granville Scott had been previously selected by Lord Lee, the Lord Lieutenant of the county, as colonel. Major Sanders had accepted the captaincy, Mr. J. O. Mason been appointed lieutenant, and 111 names entered on the roll of members of the 1st Company, but it was not till the above-named day that the movement really made progress. The mayor, Mr. Those. Lloyd, Sir John Ratcliffe, Mr. A. Dixon, and Mr. J. Lloyd each then promising to equip his 20 men apiece, and sundry other gentlemen aiding to dress up others of the rank and file. The money thus being found, the men were soon forthcoming too, the end of the year showing 320 names on the roll call, a number increased to 1,080 by the close of 1860. The latter year saw the first parade in Calthorpe Park, the opening of the range at Bournebrook, and the formation of the 12 companies forming the 1st Battalion, but notwithstanding many liberal donations, the gunmakers giving £850, and the proceeds of the first annual ball, it closed with the corps being in debt over £1,000. On the formation of the 2nd County Battalion, Call Scott took command thereof, Major Sanders being promoted. He was followed by Lieutenant Call Mason, on whose resignation in February 1867 Major Ratcliffe succeeded, the battalion being then 161 strong. Call Ratcliffe retired in June 1871 and was replaced by Major General Hind, C.B., who held command until his death, March 1, 1881. Major Jem, who temporarily acted as commander, also died the following Nov. 4, Major Burt filling the post till the appointment of Call W. Swinfen Jervis. The first adjutant, appointed in 1860, was Captain McKinney's, who retired in 1870, having received bodily injuries through being thrown from his horse. He was succeeded by the present Adjutant Colonel Tart. The first uniform of the corps was a gray tunic with green facings and a peaked cap with cock's feathers. In 1863, this was changed for a green uniform with red facings, similar to that worn by the 60th Rifles, with the exception of a broad red stripe on the trousers. The trouser stripe was done away with in 1875, when also the cap and feathers gave place to the Busby and Glengarry, the latter in 1884 being exchanged for the regulation army helmet, and soon perhaps our boys will all be seen in scarlet like their brothers of the Staffordshire battalions. At no date since its enrollment has the battalion been free from debt, and it now owes about £1,300, a state of affairs hardly creditable to the town, which sends out yearly some 500,000 firearms from its manufactories. The annual balls did not become popular, the last taking place in 1864. Bazaars were held October 14-17, 1863, and October 24-27, 1876. Athletic displays have been given, the first in May, 1865, and the cap has been sent round more than once, but the debt still remains. At the Volunteer Review, July 24, 1861, before the Duke of Cambridge. At the Hyde Park Review, June, 1865, before the Prince of Wales. At the Midland Counties Review at Derby, June, 1867. At the Royal Review at Windsor in 1868. And at every inspection since, the Birmingham Corps has merited and received the highest praise for general smartness and efficiency. It is one of the crack corps of the kingdom, and at the present time, end of 1884, has not one inefficient member out of its 1,200 rank and file, but yet the town is not liberal enough to support it properly. The first march out of 720 to Sutton took place June 21, 1875, others joining at the camp, making over 800 being under canvas, 744 attending the review. The camping out at Streatley Wood has annually recurred since that date. The first sham fight took place June 20, 1877. The coming of age was celebrated by a dinner at the Midland Hotel, January 29, 1881, up to which time the government grants had amounted to £26,568.14. The local subscriptions to £8,780 and the donations to £1,956 ones. 3d. The Birmingham Rifle Corps is now known as the 1st Volunteer Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, having been linked to the Saucy 6th, under the Army scheme of 1873C, Public Buildings Drill Hall. Von Beck. The Baroness von Beck was a lady intimately connected with the chiefs of the Hungarian Revolution of 1848, and appears to have been employed by them in various patriotic services. In 1851, she visited Birmingham and was a welcome guest until someone blundered and charged her with being an impostor. On the evening of August 29, she and her compatriot, Constant Dara de Morota, were arrested at the house of Mr. Tyndall and locked up on suspicion of fraud. Her sudden death in the police court next morning put a stop to the case, but an action resulted in which George Dawson and some friends were cast for heavy damages as a salve for the injured honor of M. de Morota. Wages and work in 1272. The wages of a laboring man was just 1-1/2d per day. In Henry Roman VIII's reign, laborers' wages averaged 4d per day, skilled workmen 5-1/2d per day. The penny at that time was equal to a shilling of the present day and would, relatively, purchase as much. In 1682, the justices of the peace assembled in quarter sessions at Warwick fixed the rates of wages to be paid to the several classes of artificers, laborers, and others, as enjoined by a statute of Elizabeth. From their order then made, we find that a master carpenter, his servants, and journeymen were to receive ones each per day. A master bricklayer, a mason, a cartwright, a thatcher, a tiler, a mower, and a reaper also ones per day, other workmen and laborers averaging from 4d to 8d per day, but none of them to receive more than half these rates if their meat and drink was found them. The hours of work to be from 5 in the morning till 7:30 at night. Any person refusing to work upon these terms was to be imprisoned, and anyone paying more to forfeit £5 in addition to 10 days' imprisonment, the unfortunate individual receiving such extra wages to suffer in like manner for 21 days. In 1777, there was a row among the tailors, which led to what may be called the first local strike. The unfortunate Knights of the Thimble only got 12s to 14s per week. Warstone Lane takes its name from the Horstone, supposed to have been an ancient boundary mark, which formerly stood at the corner of the Lane and Eichnild Street, and which is now preserved within the gateway entrance to the Church of England Cemetery. Hutton says that in 1400 there was a castle, with a moat round it, in Warstone Lane. The lane has also been called Deadman's Lane, and considering the proximity of the cemetery, that name might even now be applicable. Warwick House, as it now stands, began in 1839 or 1840. Formerly, it was composed of 2 cottages, one with a bit of garden ground in front, which underwent the usual transformation scene of being first covered, in then built upon. Warwickshire, the county in which Birmingham is situated, has a total area of 566,458 acres, of which 283,946 acres are permanent pasture lands, and 210,944 acres under crops or arable land. In 1882, the livestock in the country, as returned by the occupiers of land, included 29,508 horses, 5,503 being kept solely for breeding, 93,334 cattle, 218, 355 sheep, and 41,832 pigs. Warwick Castle is open to visitors every day, except Sunday, when the family are absent from home from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., but if they are at home, from 9 to 10 a.m. only. Warwick vase. The bronze copy in Aston Hall was cast by Sir Richard Thomason. Warwickshire Regiment, the 6th Foot, recruited in this county in 1778, so successfully that it was called the Warwickshire, Birmingham supplying the largest proportion of the men, and raising by public subscription £2,000 towards their equipment. Under Lord Cardwell's Army Localization Plan of 1873, the regiment is now called the 1st Royal Warwickshire, and, with the Warwickshire Militia and Volunteers, forms the 28th Brigade. Watch House on the right-hand side of Crooked Lane from High Street may still be seen the old watch house, where 50 years ago, the Charlies, or night watchmen, took any drunken or disorderly characters, or night prowlers, they happened to meet with or whom they dare tackle. Waterloo veterans John Mackay was born in November 1792 and entered the Army as a drummer boy in 1803. He died here in July 1879. He served 41 years and was for the last 25 years of his life office keeper of the Royal Engineers Office in this town. Another Waterloo man, George Taylor, died here November 6, 1880, aged 98. Water pipes in 1810, Mr. Murdoch started a company for manufacturing stone pipes for waterworks, and they made a large quantity, which were laid down in London and Manchester. But they had to come up again, as the pipes split and the company burst. Waterspouts and whirlwinds are not of common occurrence hereabouts. One of the former burst over the Lickey Hills, April 13, 1792, the resulting flood reaching to Bromsgrove. A whirlwind at Coleshill, April 4, 1877, played havoc with some hayricks, hedges, trees, and sea. Water Street, formerly Water Lane, had a brook running down one side of it when houses were first built there. Weathercock's mention is made of weathercocks as early as the 9th century, and it has been supposed that the cock was intended as an emblem of the vigilance of the clergy, who irreverently styled themselves the cocks of the Almighty, their duty being, like the cock which roused Peter, to call the people to repentance, or at any rate to church. These are the longest-lived birds we know of. The one which had been perched on the old spire of St. Martin's for 100 years or more was brought down July 22, 1853, and may still be seen at Aston Hall, along with the old bird that tumbled off Aston Church October 6, 1877. The last was made of copper in July 1830 and contained, among other articles, a copy of Swinney's Birmingham Chronicle of June 29, 1815, with a full account of the Battle of Waterloo. Weighing machines were introduced by John Wyatt in 1761, and the first was purchased by the overseers in 1767, so that the profits might reduce the poor rates. It was situated at the top corner of Snow Hill, and so much did the overseers value it that they gave notice, Feb. 18, 1783, of their intention of applying to Parliament for the monopoly of securing the benefit of weighing out coals to the town. Welsh Cross, one of the old-time market houses at the corner of Bull Street, the bottom portion of the edifice being used by country people as a butter market. The upper room was for meetings and occasionally used for the detention of prisoners who came, it has been said, through the window on to a small platform for the pillory or cat o' nine tails, according to their sentence. West Bromwich, if we are to credit Britannia de Picto, published in 1753, was originally West Bromwickham or West Birmingham. Wheely's Lane, though one of the quietest thoroughfares in Edgbaston, was formerly used as part of the coach road to Bristol, those vehicles passing the old church and down Priory Road. Windmill, the old windmill that used to be on Holloway Head, is marked on the 1752 map, and it has been generally understood that a similar structure stood there for many generations, but this one was built about 1745. The sails might have been seen in motion 40 or 45 years ago, and probably corn was then ground there. After the departure of the miller and his men, it was used for a time as a sort of huge summer house, a camera obscura being placed at the top, from which panoramic views of the neighborhood could be taken. It was demolished but a few years back. Woman's Rights, a local branch of the Women's Suffrage Association, was formed here in 1868. A Women's Liberal Association was instituted in October 1873. A branch of the National Union, or Working Women, was organized January 29, 1875. And a Woman Ratepayers Protection Society was established in August 1881. With ladies on the school board, lady guardians, lady doctors, a special Women's Property Protection Act, and C. It can hardly be said that our lady friends are much curtailed of their liberty. We know there are ladies' refreshment rooms, ladies' restaurants, and ladies' associations for useful work and a good many other things, but we doubt if the dear creatures of today would ever dream of having such an institution as Ladies' Card Club, like that of their Edgbaston predecessors of a century back. Women guardians. The introduction of the female element in the choice of guardians of the poor has long been thought desirable, and an association for promoting the election of ladies was formed in 1882. There are now 2 women guardians on the Birmingham board and 1 on the King's Norton board. Taking lesson of their political brothers, the members of the association, experiencing some difficulty in finding ladies with proper legal qualification to serve on the board, purchased a qualification, and then run their candidate in. The next step will doubtless be to pay their members, and, as the last year's income of the association amounted to £12,400, 11d, there can be no difficulty there. Yeomanry Cavalry. The last official report showed the Warwickshire Regiment could muster 213 on parade, while the Staffordshire had 422. YMCA and YWCAC, philanthropic institutions. Zoological Association. Early, in 1873, a provisional committee of gentlemen undertook the formation of a local society similar to that of the Regent's Park of London, proposing to raise a fund of 7,000 towards such an establishment, partly by donations and partly in shape of entrance fees to fellowship, fixed at £5. It was believed that with a fair number of annual 40s, subscriptions and gate money from the public that such a society might be made successful. Several handsome donations were promised, and a lot of fellows put their names down as good for the fivers. But when, a little time after, Edmonds, alias Wombwell's agents were trying to find here a purchaser for their well-known traveling collections, the Pikecrest proverb was again proved to be correct. Zoological Gardens. Morris Roberts, the ex-prizefighter, opened a menagerie in the grounds of the Sherborne Hotel and called it the Zoological Gardens, May 4, 1873. The animals were sold in April 1876, the place not being sufficiently attractive. Obituary. The following short list of local people of interest may not be an unacceptable addition to the many whose names appear in various parts of the preceding work. Aitken W.C., the working man's friend, died March 24, 1875, aged 58. Albites Achille, a respected teacher of French, died June 8, 1872, aged 63. Aris Thomas, founder of the Gazette, died July 4, 1761. Aylesford Lord died Jan 13, 1885 at Big Springs, Texas, aged 35. Banks Morris, chemist and druggist, died June 21, 1880, aged 75. Banks William, long connected with the local press, died March 1, 1870, aged 50. Bates William, a literary connoisseur of much talent, died September 24, 1884. Bolton Anne, only daughter of Matthew Bolton, died October 13, 1829. Brown Reverend Philip, for 32 years vicar of St. James's, Edgbaston, died September 15, 1884. Bird Alfred, well known as a manufacturing chemist, died December 15, 1878, aged 67. Barrett Reverend I.C., for 43 years rector of St. Mary's, died February 26, 1881. Bracebridge Charles Holt, a descendant of the Holts of Aston, died July 12, 1872, aged 73. He left several pictures and to the town. Brailsford Reverend Mr., headmaster grammar school, died November 20, 1775. Bray Solomon, formerly town clerk, died January 9, 1859. Bree Reverend John George, 7 years minister of Christ Church, died December 5, 1839, in his 44th year. Bredon Luke, over 50 years a minister of the Society of Friends, died in 1740, aged 81. Briggs Major WBRV, died January 24, 1877, aged 45. Byrne Reverend Edward, 52 years minister at St. Mary's, died May 20, 1837, aged 77. Cadbury, B.H., died January 23, 1880, in his 82nd year. Chavez, Pi, a surgeon, well known by his works on the medical treatment of women and children, died September 20, 1879, in his 70th year. Chavez, those, pupil of Abernethy, and followed his profession in this town till his 80th year. He died October 19, 1884, aged 84. Church Benj of the Gazette, died July 1, 1874, aged 48. Davis, George, a local poet as well as printer, died 1819. Dawson, Susan Francis, relict of George Dawson, died November 9, 1878. Dobbs, James, a comic song writer and comedian, a great favorite with his fellow townspeople, died November 1, 1837, aged 56. Edgington, F., an eminent painter on glass, died March 25, 1805, aged 68. Elkington, George Richards, the patentee and founder of the electroplate trade, died September 22, 1866, aged 65. Everett, Edward, landscape painter, a pupil of David Cox and a member of the Original Society of Arts, died July 2, 1880, in his 88th year. Feeney, J.F., proprietor of Birmingham Journal, died May 12, 1869. Freeth, Miss Jane, last surviving daughter of poet Freeth, died September 2, 1860, aged 89. Garbett, Reverend John, died August 23, 1858, aged 66. Garner, Thomas, a distinguished line engraver, died in July, 1868. His delineations of the nude figure were of the highest excellence. Godfrey Robt, for nearly 50 years a minister of the Catholic Apostolic Church, died Jan. 12, 1883, aged 75. Go John, an old churchwarden of St. Martin's, died November 30, 1877, aged 63. Hammond, Reverend Joseph, congregational minister, Handsworth, died March 30, 1870. Hanman William, for 21 years market superintendent, died Dec. 1, 1877, aged 51. Hill, M.D., first borough recorder, died June 7, 1872, aged 79. Hill, Reverend Micaiah, director of the town mission, founder of the Female Refuge and Cabmen's Mission, and C., died September 24, 1884, aged 60. Hodgetts William, the first printer of the Birmingham Journal, in 1825, and afterwards publisher of Birmingham Advertiser, died January 2, 1874, aged 83. Hodgson, Mr. Joseph, for 27 years one of the surgeons at General Hospital, died February 7, 1869, aged 82. Holder Henry, died January 27, 1880, in his 70th year. Hollings W. Architect, died January 12, 1843, aged 80. Horton Isaac, pork butcher, died November 15, 1880, aged 59. His property in this town estimated at £400,000, besides about 100,000 worth in Walsall, West Bromwich, and C. Hudson Benjamin, printer, 54 years in one shop, died December 9, 1875, aged 79. Hutton Catherine, only daughter of William Hutton, died March 31, 1846, aged 91. Hutton Reverend Hugh, many years minister at Old Meeting, died September 13, 1871, aged 76. Ivers, the Very Reverend Bernard, canon of St. Chad's Cathedral, and for 30 years rector of St. Peter's, Roman Catholic, Church, Broad Street, died June 19, 1880. Jaffray James, a pleasant writer of local history, died Jan. 7, 1884. June Reverend Francis, Bishop of Peterborough, and once head master of Free Grammar School, died August 21, 1868, aged 62. Kennedy Reverend Ran, of St. Paul's, died January 5, 1851, aged 79. Kentish Reverend John, for 50 years pastor at the New Meeting, died March 6, 1853. Knight Edward, an eminent comic actor who had long performed at Drury Lane and the Lyceum, was born in this town in 1774, died Feb. 21, 1826. Lee Dr. J. Prince, the first Bishop of Manchester, and who had been for many years headmaster at Free Grammar School, died December 24, 1869. Lloyd Mr. Sampson, banker, died December 28, 1807, aged 80. Macready W.M., many years manager at Theatre Royal, died April 11, 1829. Mackenzie, Reverend John Robertson, D.D., many years at Scotch Church, Broad Street, died March 2, 1877, aged 66. Maddox Charles, a local Democrat of 1819, died April 3, 1856, aged 78. Marston Reverend J.B., of St. Peter's, died June 16, 1870. McKinney's Capt. P., Adjutant B.R.V., died February 16, 1880, aged 66 years. Mitchell Sidney J., solicitor, accidentally killed at Solihull, March 22, 1882. Mole Major Robert B.R.V., died June 9, 1875, aged 46. Moore Joseph, founder of the Birmingham Musical Festival, died April 19, 1851. Mataram J., 8 years county court judge, died Sep 19, 1884, aged 67. Nettleford Joseph Henry, died November 22, 1881, aged 54. He left a valuable collection of pictures to the art gallery. Not Dr. John, born in 1751, studied surgery in Birmingham, but was better known as an elegant poet and Oriental scholar, died. In 1826, Oldknow Reverend Joseph, vicar of Holy Trinity, died September 3, 1874, aged 66. Osler Those, Clarkson, died Nov. 5, 1876, leaving personal estate value £140,000. He bequeathed £1,000 to the hospitals and £3,000 to the art gala. Rye Page Reverend Richard, first vicar of St. Asaph's, died March 9, 1879, aged 41. Pemberton Charles Rees, long connected with Mechanics' Institute, died March 3, 1840, aged 50. Penn Benjamin, died November 13, 1789. He was one of the old newsmen who, for 20 years, delivered the Gazette to its readers, and though he traveled nearly 100 miles a week, never suffered from illness. Pettit Reverend G., vicar of St. Jude's, died January 19, 1873, aged 64. Pye John, a celebrated landscape engraver, died February 6, 1874, aged 91. Ratcliffe Lady Jane, widow of Sir John, died Sep 12, 1874, aged 72. Redfern William, the first town clerk, died April 23, 1872, aged 70. Rees W.H., solicitor, died in May, 1873, aged 63. He rebuilt St. Tudnow's Church on the Ormshead and did much to popularize Llandudno. Richards Mr. W.M. Wesley, the world-known filmmaker, died Sept 14, 1875, aged 76. Robbins Ebenezer, auctioneer, died July 1, 1871. Rotten H., died December 13, aged 67. Salt T.C., a prominent member of the political union, died April 27, 1859, aged 70. Saxton Reverend Lott, a Methodist New Connection minister of this town, died suddenly, September 1880, in his 72nd year. Schofield Joshua, MP, died July 4, 1814, aged 70. Schofield Reverend Ratcliffe, for 30 years pastor of Old Meeting, died June 27, 1803, aged 70. Smith John, attorney, died September 23, 1867. Smith Talman died April 30, 1869. Spooner Reverend Isaac, for 36 years vicar of Edgbaston, died July 26, 1884, aged 76. Spooner Richard, Esquire, MP, died November 24, 1864, aged 81. Spooner Mr. William, for 17 years county court judge of the North Staffordshire district, died May 19, 1880, in his 69th year. Stambridge Thomas, town clerk, died February 10, 1869, aged 52. St. John Reverend Ambrose of the Oratory, died May 24, 1875, aged 60. Swinney Miles, 50 years publisher of the Birmingham Chronicle, died November 2, 1812, aged 74. Thornton, capt. F. Bev, was thrown from his carriage and killed May 22, 1876. He was 35 years of age. Turner, George, firm of Turner, son and nephew, died March 25, 1875, aged 68, leaving a fortune of £140,000. Upton, James, printer, died November 9, 1874. Vincent Henry, the chartist, died Dec. 29, 1878. Warall, William, for 30 years secretary of St. Philip's Building Society, died May 1, 1880, in his 78th year. Wright, Mr. Those. Barber, who died October 11, 1878, was one of the founders of the Midland Counties Herald, the first to propose the Hospital Sunday collections and to establish the cattle shows.